Okay, I see that everyone has joined us. I think we can call this meeting to order. I'm looking at our regia here. Are we good technically? Let me know when. We're good? Wonderful. Okay, everyone. I should say good afternoon, even though we are right in the middle of the day. So, welcome to the July 21st, 2023 California Board Behavioral Science Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. My name is Max Disposti, pronounced he, him, and I'm the chairperson of this committee. And before we convene, as always, I would like to remind everyone that's present or watching that the board is a consumer protection agency that is charged with administering and enforcing the board laws. Where protections of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protections of the public shall be paramount. I will announce when we are accepting public comments on the various issues, and the meeting moderator will open the lines as appropriate, or I will directly address the audience here present. Each commentator will have 2 minutes to comment. And I think this is the time where our moderators will, would you please, hi, first of all, and would you please provide the audience instructions on how they might participate during the meeting in the appropriate times? And thank you.
Hello, this is the moderator. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Each time it is opened up for public comment, we will display the instructions and give verbal instructions as well. So you click on the question inside of the square, which is typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. And then you enter comment in the text field that appears. Make sure it goes to all panelists before clicking the send button. You can also raise your hand by clicking on the outline of a hand, which is typically located on the command row, bottom center of your WebEx screen. Or if you have the panelist list open, it'll be next to your name if you hover your cursor over your name. And for those who are calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. When prompted, select the unmute me button for those who are logged in, or for those who are calling in. Follow the prompts to unmute yourselves. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, moderator. We received a few comments that perhaps my voice is not coming through. Can you confirm if you're able to hear us, or the members of the audience that they are connected with WebEx?
I can hear you clearly, but I just noticed that it went out a little bit there towards the end. From your settings, I'm not sure how you're connected, but from your settings, if there's a way to remove or uncheck the automatically adjust volume, which is in the webinar settings.
Actually, I'm live from Sacramento, so I'm connecting through my mic. So we are testing a little bit if there are any things that we are supposed to fix or change to make sure that our audience is able to hear us clearly. Are you still having issue with receiving?
What I can hear you clearly is just sometimes it's going out, but I think someone's working on it. A tech is working on it, I believe.
Okay. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you feel that my connections is lost. We want to make sure that our audience at home is able to participate fully. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much. One quick communication before we go to the quorum and to the order is that item 6 on the agenda today will not be discussed. And at this point, we will call the order. And Christina, if you can help us with that to establish a quorum, and thank you.
Good afternoon. Max Disposti.
Here, present.
John Sovek.
Present, LMFT.
Wendy Strack.
Present, public member.
Abigail Ortega.
Present, LCSW.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Thank you, fellow board member, for introducing yourself. Myself, it's Max Esposi, chairperson and public member. So we are now moving to our item after the introductions, 3 in our agenda, which is the discussion and possible approval of the July 29 and October 14, so July 29, October 14, and January 13 committee meetings minutes. So this is between 2022 and 2023. So this is next on the agenda, the discussion and possible approval of July 29, October 14, and January 13 committee meetings minutes.
So for the July meeting minutes, I did receive some editing, and page 5 and page 9, I will be making those edits.
Thank you. There are, I'm assuming, just not substantial, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So are there any other wishes of removing or correcting any of the items from the consent calendar? If not, I need a second, a motion, and then a second.
Motion to approve the July 29th, 2022, October 14th, 2022, and January 13th, 2023 committee meeting minutes as amended.
Thank you, Wendy Schreck. And we need a second. Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second. John Sovek.
Thank you, John. And we have a motion on the floor. If there are any comments from the member of the public about the minutes, doesn't look like. We have only one. And then, moderator, if you will please open the lines to the public and to see if there are any comments about the motion on the floor in regards to the approval of our consent calendar, including the minutes.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you'd like to participate, click that question mark, type comment, hit send, or click on the outline of a hand. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, back here to the council, we have one motion on the floor and a second. At this point, we are ready to vote. And Christine, if you can call the vote, please. Thank you.
Max Esposi?
Yes.
John Sovek?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're moving right to the item 4 of our agenda calendar for today, which is the discussion and possible recommendation regarding clarifying supervision requirements under the business and professional codes that you see attached to the agenda. So I believe that Roseanne will introduce these agenda items, and then we are going to discuss it. Thank you, Roseanne.
That's me. Thanks,
and good
Matt.
morning. Good afternoon.
So this item of discussion today, it was brought to our attention by one of our stakeholder organizations because it's, there's been a couple of instances of where the definition of a supervisee in law is causing some confusion. So currently in our board's practice acts, we use the term supervisee, but there's not an actual definition. In most cases, it's implied, and a definition is likely not needed in the context of which it's used in our practice acts. It can be reasonably inferred to mean an individual required by the board to be under supervision. An individual might be required to be under supervision for numerous reasons. The most obvious reason would be they are an associate and they must be under supervision, but also people working in a non-exempt setting that are registered with the board also have to be under supervision. Somebody following the 90-day rule has to be under supervision. An MFT trainee who's counting hours towards licensure has to be under supervision. So it's not necessarily just an associate that has to be under supervision. But there's two instances in the law where that discussion we just had above might not apply and the intended definition is unclear. So I'm going to talk about these two instances. It gets pretty technical, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the first one first, and then we'll stop and discuss, and then the second one is a sort of loosely related to it, so then we'll talk about that after. So the first part that becomes unclear is in the definition of direct supervisor contact. And that definition is in LMFT, LCSW, and LPCC law. It's pretty much the same identical wording in each practice act. And these subsections define individual supervision, triadic supervision, and group supervision for purposes of direct supervisor contact, which is required when gaining your supervised experience hours for licensure. The current definition for supervisor contact includes one supervisor and a specified number of supervisees. So if it's individual, it's one supervisor and one supervisee. Triadic is 1 and 2 supervisees. Group is up to 8 supervisees. But the term supervisee in the context of the board's practice act refers to individuals required by the board's practice acts to be under supervision. However, when limiting supervisees per supervisor to a particular number, for example, eight supervisees in a group, a question arises. The law doesn't address where individuals receiving supervision who are not required by the board to be under supervision count as toward that 8 supervisee limit in a group setting. For example, we had a question of somebody that was having a licensee participate in supervision because they felt that they needed some extra supervision. Does that person count as one of the 8 in the group? They're not technically required by the board to get supervision, but they are taking up a space in that supervision group. And if the idea of supervision is to make sure that each supervisee gets the individual attention that they need to grow and develop in their career, then it might be worth having only 8, regardless of the definition. So that's kind of where this discussion is going. Attachment A shows one possible solution to this issue. Instead of limiting the number of supervisees, it changes that wording to say that it's limited to 1 supervisor and, let's say, for example, group 8 persons receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. So, and that would capture, if we were to use that language, it would capture not only the board's associate and trainees and 90-day rule applicants, but also psychology pre-licensees who are not required by this board to be under supervision, and under other types of individuals, such as those who are doing clinical work without a license or a registration. Maybe they're in an exempt setting, but they're getting supervision. Or maybe they're a licensee receiving supervision at the request of their employer. And then based on stakeholder feedback, the language in attachment A also proposes clarifying who may attend a supervision session, because we had feedback the last time we discussed this that there's some question about whether clinical mental health professionals may sit in on supervision as observers without counting against the total allowable number of people being supervised. And so it states that is allowed if another clinical mental health professional is observing that is allowed, but it does state that if somebody is not providing clinical services, then they're not permitted in a supervision session. So for example, you can't have, the HR person of the organization sitting in a clinical supervision setting just because they want to maybe learn to be a mental health professional, because there's confidential things being discussed. So I'm going to stop there, and we can discuss the language in attachment A and see how everybody feels about that language.
Hey, voila. Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you so much. So we can start from the board to see if there are any questions or clarifications. So introducing the conversation as well from any of my fellow board members on the left and the right. There are none. Okay, then perhaps from members that are present here in Sacramento, if there are any questions, observations, or comments about this item, feel free to come forward, introduce yourself. Let's try again. Hold on. That should work. Thank you, Ben.
Good afternoon, Ben Caldwell, MFT. Forgive me if I may be ahead of things here. Actually, Rebecca, do you want to get? Let me sort myself out here for a second.
Let's try that again.
Hello, Rebecca Gonzalez of the National Association of Social Workers California chapter. I'm going to agree with Roseanne that this is complex and confusing, so hopefully my comments are on point, and I actually wanted to, of course, check with people that we work with, and I got some really great feedback from a social work faculty member. And she actually had a concern with the language in attachment A, because I think that would include, and I'm going to look at you, Roseanne, MSW student interns in attachment A?
Yes, if they're receiving supervision for providing clinical services.
Okay. Because at this point, are they included or it's unclear?
They would be included in the limit of 8.
Okay. So her concern with that, one, when ASWs and other associates from other professions, it's really difficult to find supervisors. So we're a little concerned that would take slots away from ASWs who want to gain hours, but also contribute to a lower level of clinical oversight for MSW student interns. And what she means by that is it would lead to a slippery slope in the area of training. Agencies may come to expect, rely upon group supervision for all student clinical training oversight, which is not appropriate for an MSW student. And the example she gives, it might assign a task supervisor to provide the overall supervision for the student internship experience, while their only clinical oversight could come from group supervision. This is concerning because it's easier for some voices to get lost in group supervision, and students need a slower review than most group supervisors would allow for. So that was the concern there. So I think when I looked over this, I did think of the problem of MSW student interns taking the slot of an ASW when it's so difficult to find supervision. But I think this person that I consulted with brought a whole new wrinkle to it when she talked about what is appropriate for students and that students need a different oversight. And then she also said, additionally, if MSW students can be counted in groups, it might dissuade agencies from taking MSW student interns as they may be needed as needing, and then quote unquote, more supervision than an MFT student, because MSWs require 1 hour per week of individual supervision, not triadic, not group. Group could be offered in addition to, but not offered in lieu of weekly one-on-one individual supervision. So once again, I hope that's on point. I think it is. It took a while to really comb through this and figure out, what the implications were. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Back.
Hi, sorry, I'll try again. Ben Caldwell, MFT. In the proposed language in paragraph B2, it uses the phrase persons who provide non-clinical services, and I wondered whether that might be better phrased the other way around, persons who do not provide clinical services. The reason being that some supervisees also provide non-clinical services, and so just to make sure that this doesn't inadvertently exclude them, that it's sort of categorizing in the right way. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Great point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. No further question from the board, so I will suggest, moderator, if you can please open to the public and see if there are any inputs from our audience. Thank you.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate and are logged in, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comments, send it to all panelists, or you can raise your hand by pressing on the outline of a hand. Those who are calling in can press *3 to raise your virtual hand. So I'm going to set my timer here for 2 minutes. I do have Kathy Atkins. I'm going to send a request, and I have a few actually. I'll send Kathy Atkins request to unmute microphone. You're unmuted.
It's from CAFT. I wanted to thank the committee for bringing this up. It's been an ongoing issue with our members calling into our legal hotline for clarity. And we've received feedback from our membership from agencies and different stakeholders, clinicians, sort of, maybe for a lack of a better word, sort of on the various sides of this and which they think is the most appropriate. CAMP is not taking a position per se on what the outcome should be and how it should be changed. I think what CAMP is looking forward to the most is a clearer definition, just so that when we are providing support to our membership, we have a better answer than what we really provide now. So like I said, we're looking forward to hearing from those on the phone and on the floor and the committee. You know, if there's any input that you know, we want to respond to or provide input, but at this point, it's more just looking forward to clarity on the issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Individual
Moderator,
identified as
go ahead.
Laura DeSantis. I'm going to send a request to mute your microphone.
DeSantis, LPCC. I have a question around the definition of an observer and what degree of involvement an observer would have in this, keeping in mind that if an observer speaks up or starts to participate or even give feedback, given that they're licensed, that it might kind of detract from the idea of an 8-person group and keeping that limit at 8 people. So I was just looking for clarification on the word observer and wondering if the law would benefit from explicitly stating what that means.
Thank you.
This is the moderator. No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. And we're coming back to the board. I believe that our board member, John Savek, has a question or a comment.
Rebecca, you may be able to help me with this, or Roseanne. What is the equivalency between an MSW student intern and an MFT trainee?
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. They are both in their master's program. So they're like at the same point in their education, but an MFT trainee could count hours towards licensure, which is a unique thing that we provide in California.
Okay. So in my understanding then, they are still both in school, so they're still getting feedback in their school loop as well too, and getting educated while they're getting this particular training. It's not just on the supervisors themselves to be providing all the support and training.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then I also agree with the comment about what is an observer and what is their role in stepping into those places. Just thinking of the dynamics that could play out there, how it might affect the energy of the group itself, how it might affect the clinical discussions that happen in that group, and politics within an agency, how it might influence as well too. So maybe easing out a little bit more, what actually is an observer? Are they a non-participatory observer, like specifically pointing that out, versus someone who's an observer and then starts, as the public member said, start making comments or getting involved in the process, which could create a really rough dynamic for supervision.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, John Savek. Are there any other comments, suggestions, or as a reminder, this is not, obviously, it's an open conversation that we're going to bring back to the board. This is not a final decision in any ways, but there is definitely the possibility to make a motion to instruct staff to continue the conversation and to bring to the board even further understanding about the the changes. So Roseanne, what would you?
Yeah, so I'm hearing a couple of different things. I'm hearing
Right.
kind of a couple of different discussions that I think that we would need direction on, kind of which way we're looking to go. One of them, so we're defining the supervision as a person, a supervisor and a person, a certain number of people receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. I'm hearing a question of whether trainees and social work interns should be excluded from that possibly, which is a valid question, although it's kind of I don't know that we could exclude just social work interns. We would need to treat all of them equally, but then MFT trainees actually count pre-degree hours, so that's a little complicated. It might be just cleanest to exclude trainees explicitly, but I don't know what the feelings are about that. That's one possibility that comes to my mind. In terms of the observation, right now the law doesn't say anything about observation, so it would be kind of going into a new area. I kind of, like John said, possibly he used the term non-participating observer. That's kind of an interesting direction. I don't know if we want to explore going in that, specifying it that far. So interested to hear what everybody's thoughts kind of are on that.
Right. I just have a question, Max Disposi here. In reading the bill, I was the proposal, I was a little bit confused because there were some things that made sense, others that I was thinking of maybe a little bit of a personal bias in my own agency settings and trying to exclude other trainees from the context could be very actually creating barriers for education accessibility. I can imagine agencies trying to have two different kinds of supervision, but then again, I'm not a clinician, so I understand what John was saying about the possibility that other voice might influence, not necessarily in a positive way, especially another person from the agency. So my understanding, obviously, that in a supervision setting, only clinicians providing supervision are obviously the one with the responsibility to do so, and then you have the supervisee, which usually are students, gaining their hours or their supervision for, the purpose of becoming clinicians, and those are the only people allowed in the space for obvious confidentiality reasons. But the division between the 8 people is that if the number will start including possible other presence and take away from the experience of the students that they are there for the hours, that could be complicated because now you're reducing the number of actually training in that space. Just an example, if a clinical settings has the supervisor, which is the clinical person doing supervision, but then you have another licensee individual that's there even in support of the conversation. This is good for a lot of reasons, right? Because of the agency needs or so forth. So including that individual that has a license into the number of the 8 could be actually taken away from, the numbers of training that can be allowed in the room. So that's how I was reading it, and I thought that maybe that could be limiting if that's the outcome. But then other things in the bill were contradictory as well because they were talking about different other presence in the clinical settings too. Roseanne? And
it kind of becomes complicated. Maybe I can shed some light on. So this definition only applies for people who are counting hours with the board.
Right.
So the question becomes, it's not really a question that when we get the call, hey, we have this licensee sitting in supervision, does that count as one of the 8? It doesn't matter for the purpose of the licensee that's getting supervision, but it matters for the others in the group, our associates that are gaining hours. And the limit of the 8, if you think about the reason or even if it's 2 for triadic, is so that person is getting a good supervision experience, right, that the supervisor can pay attention. But and going back to the social work intern, it's kind of an interesting question. It doesn't really matter so much for the social work intern. They're not subject to these definitions because they're not counting hours. But if somebody what it comes down to is these definitions are important. If you have somebody in your group, like an associate or an MFT trainee where their hours are being counted, it's really what the main question is how many people do we want in there? Do we really only care about our people? Is that the point of the limit, or is it the broader sense of we want to make sure that they're getting a good supervisory education? It doesn't necessarily matter, but the social work intern doesn't necessarily have to have, they can supervise as many social work interns as they want, but if there's an associate in there too, they're only supposed to be in a group of 8 per group. So that's where it kind of gets complicated because there's all these different layers and different things happening.
And
Thank
just
you,
in
Roseanne.
response to that comment too, though, I think for a MSW student intern, you don't want to just throw them in a group of 30 people. So by keeping them in this new definition that you're working with, and that starts to spread out the idea that what we're actually looking at is a supervisor with 8 people who are trying to get their education, get their stuff, including MSD student interns, trainees, and everybody else in that process, whether they're gaining hours or not. So what we're actually trying to do overall is create the strength of this group of supervisor and 8 people. So I don't know if parsing out, like excluding trainees and MSW student interns is actually a wise decision in that, because then are we throwing the MSW student interns out into the wild with like, okay, we've got a big room, bring everybody in and let's do supervision. So I would not want to encourage excluding them from this new definition.
Right.
And then one other thought too, just because I know how your brain works sometimes, is this going to cascade out into other parts of our definitions that we need to be aware of too?
This definition would be specific to what does 1 hour of direct supervisor contact mean? Under subdivision B, where we're not saying a supervisee means this. We're saying it needs to be between one supervisor and one person receiving supervision. So we're not establishing a definition of a supervisee. We're changing the word supervisee to fit what it needs to mean for this particular situation, where there might be others that are not under the jurisdiction of the board involved. But we still might want to, we hypothetically might want to limit that so that our associates and people gaining hours can have a quality supervisory experience.
Thank you, Roseanne. Any other comments? I noticed also there was another, not discussion, but item in regards to the numbers of people participating in a non-exempt status. It's actually 6
Yes.
versus 8, which it could be very confusing because a lot of people don't even know the difference, so exempt or not exempt. I mean, especially if you're at training, you're fully aware about your agency, where it stands with that, because it could be a corporation of different sites. So definitely that will be another thing that it will be nice to, for lack of better words, really create consistencies between different settings. Now, I don't remember the conversation of why that exempt setting was 6 versus 8, so I don't want to undo anything, but I remember it was a big one.
Yeah, there's a lot of little it gets complex fast, which is why we are kind of taking this one at a time, because it kind of like when you start looking at all the little nuances, it kind of makes your head want to explode. But yes, there is, in non-exempt settings, you can have 6 supervisees, but we allow, in general, everybody, we define a group as 8 supervisees. So that's another issue that people find confusing that that I'm going to talk about in a minute here.
Okay. So, Roseanne, I know there was just a couple of suggestions, or maybe only one, that also, I believe, Dr. Caldwell was proposing in regards to, that was more like a definition.
Where it's talking about observing, did we want to say something about if licensed mental health professionals may observe supervision as non-participants or something like that.
Right.
But then it sort of implies that they can't participate, so it's like right now we don't say anything about it, so it's like how far down that road do we want to go? I don't know.
Okay. Can I ask you, so far, besides obviously the comments that were brought today, even the past, I remember, how much of this non-said has caused trouble or concerns in our everyday operations, in terms of how many people are really struggling with the definition to a point that is causing an issue of operations, in terms like this is chaotic, or we can't, what I'm trying to understand, the level of this problem, if leaving the things the way they are, not that I'm proposing that, will actually be better than trying to ultra-define situations and spaces. So I'm trying to see how much of this issue out there is becoming really a problem that everyone is struggling with. Roseanne.
I think that the definition of the what is one supervisor and a number of supervisees. I think defining supervisees, I'm hearing, is important. I'm hearing that from camps, and I'm hearing that when I get questions about, hey, there's a supervisor or a licensed person in my supervisee group, does that count? I think it isn't it's kind of a question that a lot of people have. I kind of have mixed feelings about the second part, item 2, where we're talking about observing supervision. That was kind of brought up at the last meeting. I'm almost feeling like it might be, we're defining it has to be a supervisor and a person receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. If there's an observer in there, they're not necessarily providing supervision or receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. So it may be better to say nothing rather than prescribe, the person can observe, but they can't participate, or they can participate, because we don't really say anything about that now. So that might maybe be best left to the supervisor to make the call on, maybe they have somebody that has some expertise in an area that they're talking about and they want to bring them in to participate and say, talk about their expertise, and then that's it. We don't want to disallow that, I don't think, but it might be getting a little too prescriptive.
Right. Okay. Thank you again, Roseanne. Are there any other comments? We don't need to take an official position on this. It was more a recommendation of continuing the...
Well, we can there's a couple of different things we can do. We can either bring it back to the committee to discuss again, or we can bring it on to the board.
Well, perhaps I think that because this is the second time that we talk at the P&A, I think we perhaps going to the board where we can have a bigger participation could be the way to go, so that we can have more input from the public. We'll recommend that. I don't know if our fellow board members feel the same. Abigail?
Sorry, I've been quiet because I'm reading this over and over, trying to wrap my head around it. So the pain point that this was intending to solve is that people want to know if who isn't counted towards the 8 people in supervision, and we want it to be people that, with the exception of the MSW interns, right, people that are using the time for counting towards their hours, and also we're listening for quality supervision. I don't see how BC would clarify that, because it still feels very general. It's not. It says persons receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. How is that answering who can be in there? Maybe I'm missing how this document is formatted and how it's answering that question, but.
Right now, a supervisee, pretty much in the context of our act, it means basically anybody that's required by our board to be under supervision. So it doesn't include outside people, like maybe somebody's getting hours from the Board of Psychology, maybe somebody's getting their licensee and they're getting supervision. So the question becomes, well, does that count as a supervisee? Under this definition, we would be able to say, yes, it does, because they are getting supervision for providing clinical mental health services.
Okay, and so now do we define it clearly, right? And
it's a more clear definition.
It's a more clear definition. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Do we need a motion to move this to the board, or?
So I guess it depends on, do you want to make any amendments to the language that's shown here, or do you just want to take it to the board for a further discussion?
John Solek?
So I'm intrigued by your idea of removing the observer new definition statement.
Okay.
I think what I'm hearing from the conversations here, and then what your point was, is we're just opening up this very specific thing that I think agencies would prefer to have a little bit more leeway and personal control over. Yes, we want to bring in an expert on this trauma subject because this supervision group is dealing with a lot of trauma. So now, oh wait, they have to be only an observer. How can we do that? I think it's tying up a lot of possibilities of real growth in education. So maybe actually let's pull back on that and focus on moving forward with this new definition, which is very inclusive.
Okay.
So if I hear it clearly, just for a traffic concern, so are you proposing to remove that and then bring it to the board in this open discussion? By the meantime, removing that or no?
Yes, I think,
okay.
I think that'd be a very powerful experience.
Okay, so that would be motion, right, John Sarek? Well, recommendation. It would be a motion at this point because we are proposing to, which I agree with, but
just for attachment A, so it would be a motion to just remove the 4980.43.2B2 from attachment A and bring to board for further discussion.
Perfect. That would be a great motion.
I so move.
Okay. Anyone would like to second that? I'll second. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, I'll second. So we have a motion on the floor, and before we go to the vote, we ask to the audience if they would like to share their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, NASW California. So just to be clear, the motion, I understand it, removing the observer part, but it's in keeping that more general definition, which would include social work interns.
Yes.
And so just as another comment, I must say, I mean, I am torn about this. I've been going back and forth because we don't want to be treated differently. We just want to make sure that our students get the appropriate supervision, that they're not lost, the quieter voices in this group of people who are already out of school and, or most of them, not the trainees, but, and also just the concern with taking spots for ASW since it is hard to find supervision for everyone. So I would like to, I'll probably bring this up again when it comes before the board. I want to keep the conversation going with our own folks to get more feedback from more people for how they see this and also see how this is working in the real world right now. I'm not sure. Our groups are people having groups of 8 and they are including social work interns now. I'm not sure if that is a common practice or not.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have to, but it would be more of a, if there happens to be a social work intern right. in that group, then that does take up a spot. It right. clarifies that. Whereas right now, if we get the question, well, if there's a social work intern in there or there's a licensee in there, does that take up a spot? And it's kind of like, well, the law doesn't really
right,
say.
Right.
Like, yeah.
So, I would just like to explore that further, and I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments from people in the audience? Thank you. Moderator, can we please open to the public and see if there are any comments to the motion on the floor?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, typically lower right corner of your WebEx screen. Type comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. You can raise your hand by clicking the outline of a hand, which is typically bottom center of your WebEx command row, and also located on the panelist list next to your name if you hover your cursor over your name. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. Give me just a moment. Brooke, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Request has been sent.
Just curious if the telehealth trainings on Relias will count as sufficient for the CEU requirements?
Yeah, Moderator, that's not actually, I appreciate the question, but that's not on the agenda item, so we cannot address that at the moment.
Okay. No additional requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Okay, back to the board. We have a motion moved by John Savek, seconded by me, and to summarize, the motion is to maybe Roseanne can help me with that. Thank you.
This is just a motion for just the attachment A portion.
Yeah.
And it would be to remove B2 from 4980.43.2B and to bring this proposal to the board for further discussion.
Wonderful. And I'll second that. So motion on the floor, and we are calling the vote. Thank you, Christine.
Roseanne, that was 4980.2B?
4980.43.2B2 will be removed.
Okay. Thank you. Max Disposti?
Yes.
John Sovek?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, wonderful. And now, Roseanne?
Now we'll move on to the second part of the memo. There's actually two additional pieces to discuss left. And so this next piece of the memo focuses on attachment B. And it's drafted only for MFTs right now, but once we decide on language, we would draft it for the other two. But these particular subsections that we're talking about now require supervisors of supervisees in non-exempt settings only to have no more than 6 individual or triadic supervisees at any time. And the reason it says in non-exempt settings is because in exempt settings, the law does not limit the number of supervisees per individual or triadic supervisor. So we're talking about the limit of 6 supervisees per supervisor in non-exempt settings. The subsection goes on to state that supervisees may be associates, marriage and family therapists, associate clinical social workers, or associate professional clinical counselors, or any combination of these. The reason for the limit on the number of supervisees is to ensure that a supervisor can dedicate enough time to properly supervise each one. However, stating this only includes associates leaves out other potential types of supervisees, such as trainees, those under the 90-day rule, those seeking some other type of license, such as with the Board of Psychology. So maybe that's fine, but maybe we want to limit it. Right now, you can only have 6 associates, but anything else is technically fine. Staff believes that the intent of the law is likely to limit all types of supervisees to 6 in non-exempt settings to ensure quality supervision, but that issue is up for debate and discussion. Attachment B shows one possible solution for clarifying language here. So what it would do right now, as shown, is the following. It clarifies that the supervisors of supervisees in non-exempt settings are limited to a total of 6 supervisees. Currently, there is confusion of whether the 6 supervisees per supervisor is per setting, or is it 6 total across all settings, so that we're trying to clear that up. And then it clarifies that the supervisees include not only registered associates, but also anyone who's gaining supervised experience toward licensure with the board in a non-exempt setting. So this option, the way that it's worded, would include MFT trainees and 90-day rule applicants, although it wouldn't include PCC trainees and social work interns because they don't count pre-degree hours. And the way that we've worded this particular option is that it's an individual who is gaining supervised experience hours toward licensure with the board, which PCC trainees and social work interns are not. So this is where it gets really complicated. So alternatively, if we wanted to include all possible supervisees, the language could instead state something like individuals, it includes individuals who are receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services in a non-exempt setting. And I've included that as an alternative in the definition in attachment B for you to see, because it's a little out of context when I'm on this page. But that would include everyone: associates, MFT trainees, 90-day rule applicants, also PCC trainees and social work interns, those being supervised for other professions, et cetera. So it really just depends on there's a few things that can be done here, depending on what direction that the board wants to go. It's just a matter of right now, as it can cause confusion. So we're asking if we.
Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you. Any comments, any questions from members of the board at this point? John Savek?
Roseanne, can I ask you a question? Could you give us a brief history of why the 6 and why the 8, if you have that knowledge available?
I don't know why the 8. The group supervision being 8 has been that way for a very, very long time. And it was just at some point, group supervision was set at 8. We used to, when I first started back in 2010, it used to be that a non-exempt setting could have, I think it was 2 supervisees per supervisor, and then when we got the PCC, the LPCC license, we upped it to 3 because we had 3 different license types, so we wanted to be a little bit more inclusive of them. And then a few years back when we ran AB 93, and I think it was 2018, we changed it to 6. So there's always been differences between there. People just get confused about group supervision and that you can have more supervisees if you're a group supervisor, but if you're doing individual, then you're limited to 6. Because there's so much time commitment for each one, I think, is the reasoning behind that. When you're individually supervising them, that's a really one-on-one sort of relationship, and they're learning a lot from you. Does that answer? Is there another part to your question, or did I cover it? Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Roseanne. Any other questions from the board? Okay. I'd like to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience. Thank you.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I'm going to complicate this more at the end, but not at the very beginning. So this situation is a little bit different because we're talking about the supervisor and how many people that they could supervise. Not talking about the number right now, but just talking about limiting that number, and find that it is important to preserve the quality of supervision that social work students receive. So liking the language in italics in attachment B, C2, so the more inclusive language. But agree that this is very confusing to have 2 different numbers. Wonder if focusing only on the number of supervisees, we look at the total number of clients for whom a clinical supervisor is providing clinical oversight. For example, if the limit is 8 supervisees and each supervisee sees 2 clients, that's very different from supervising 8 people when each one has a caseload of 30 clients. So I realize that really complicates it, but I think it is an important and valid point. There are several issues here when we think about numbers, quality assurance from a consumer perspective, adequate access and oversight for the supervisee, and a workload issue for the supervisors. I realize that caseloads fluctuate, and then some clients are more complex than others, so this may get too complicated. Perhaps creating ranges, something like no more than 8 total BBS eligible supervisees, whether meeting individually, triadically, or through group supervision, and clinical oversight for no more than X total clients. So like I said, I was going to complicate this, but I do think it is a valid point that if people have a lot of cases, it could be very complicated. So thought I would share those thoughts.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It definitely, in my opinion, Max here, it does complicate it, but also, I mean, I don't know, personal opinion, if we need to go in regulating that aspect also a caseloads, because also, as you know, as a clinician, sometimes what defines also a caseload, sometimes you are transitioning a client out and you see them once a month or every 2 months just to check in with them. Is that considered part of the caseload, or versus the people that had 10? I don't think it will be very complex, and also could create an unfair dynamics too in calculating the caseload numbers. So definitely that's not something that I would like to see introduced, but just my personal intake. Any other comments or questions from the audience? Okay, moderator, can we please open and see if there are any comments? Thank you.
Moderator, the Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark inside the square, type comments, send to all panelists. Those who are calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. I do have a couple requests here. I'll start with GV Ayers, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name there. I send a request to unmute your microphone, and I set my timer. And from your end, just click the unmute me button from the prompt that you receive. And GV, I'm going to send another request. There you go. You're unmuted.
Thank you. This is GV Ayers. I represent the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. I was trying to actually get in on item 4 earlier, actually, and associate CalPIC's comments with the comments by Rebecca Gonzalez regarding trainees, and appreciate you looking into this and the work that you're doing on this. We also agree with taking out the observer language limitation that you did on that. And sorry to be untimely about that, but was not able to get in earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Moderator?
Next individual, Kathy Atkins. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins with CAMFT. I concur that this is complicated. I keep finding myself closing my eyes so I can think. I apologize. I didn't totally understand the suggestion by NSAW, but so I can't comment. But for what was originally put forward in the materials, I think CAMPT is generally in support of following the original intent of the law. And if that is somehow excluding, if I'm reading it correctly, if that's somehow excluding, for example, psychologists and training or things like that, we would not, we would want clarification to a law that is somehow making it harder for the mental health workforce to get supervision, including, MFTs that are in their 90 days. Like I said, clinicians of that nature. And I apologize. I wasn't able to comment on some of the other things, but that's generally our philosophy. And when I review the materials, thank you.
And just for all our audience, I thank you for the comment. I understand sometimes we miss the opportunity, but feel free to come back because we're moving this discussion at the board level. So we will appreciate your opportunity to speak and share as well at the board session. So thank you. Moderator, are there any other comments?
Further request, would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Roseanne.
Would you like to just bring this as is to the board for further consideration, see if we can get some more feedback?
At this point, considering the comments we have received, yes.
Okay, so then the motion for this part, for attachment B would be to just bring to the board for further discussion as is.
Yes, thank you. And anyone would like to move a motion since Roseanne can't? I'll make a motion. Any seconds?
I'll second.
Wendy Strack. Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Roseanne? Okay, motion on the floor. I should have done this before because I will have to ask again if there are comments on the motion on the floor to bring the discussion back as is to the board session. For the members on the audience, any comments about that? Okay, moderator, can you please open to see if there are any comments specifically about the motion to bring back this discussion to the BBS board meeting session?
Moderator, Q&A open, instructions on the screen. Click on the question mark, type comment, or press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A? And this is the moderator. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Oh.
Okay. No request. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're back on the floor with a motion and a second. Christine, can you call the vote, please?
Max Disposti?
Yes.
John Sovic?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Wonderful, thank you. And we are actually moving. We're not moving. No, Roseanne.
we have one more little piece.
Right.
But I don't think we need a motion on this if we don't want to.
Okay.
We'll just bring it to board, but, because there's no language. But, one other sort of thing that ties into all this that I would like to bring up and get people thinking about because it is related, although tangentially, is that another common issue that we hear a lot that causes confusion that could potentially be addressed while we're addressing this particular language is that supervisors and supervisees are sometimes confused about why the law limits a non-exempt setting supervisor to 6 individual or triadic supervisees, but then for a group supervision, they can have 8. And how does that interact with their 6 if they're supervising individually, and why is that so confusing? So just something that I wanted to put out there because we're touching that language, that is another question that we get, and so if anybody has any brilliant thoughts on that, the reasons, the 6, I explained a little bit, it was originally 3 and we doubled it to kind of increase supervisor access a few years ago. The 8 has just been 8 since the dawn of time, according to me.
Since 8 was a number?
Right, so it's just been there. Maybe it's fine as is, or maybe it's something that there's a desire to clarify.
Obviously, the concept is since we are reviewing and touching the language, that could be an opportunity to see if there are any comments. Okay, since it's not a motion, it's just any comments regards. John Savek?
Now that I believe I understand these numbers, I think it's also being of service to the supervisors themselves, which is really important to look at. Because if we're looking at individual triadic, we're looking at either 6 or 3 hours for a supervisor. If we're looking at a supervisor with a group of 8, that's 2 hours. And so I think what it does, if we increase those numbers on that setting, then all of a sudden you're going to have supervisors with a much heavier burden of their hours of commitment, which might change the willingness to be a supervisor. So that would be something I would want to consider, is the actual number of hours a supervisor is bringing into that side and not just the supervisee side of it.
That's something new. Okay, thank you. Right.
Okay.
That's fair. Any other comments in regard from the board?
I don't really have any comments on that. I don't have experience in this area, but I am kind of interested in perhaps some of the stakeholder comments during public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Wendy Struck?
Yeah, I would love to hear from the supervisors out there what, if 6 is a little, just right, too much. I mean, otherwise it's just like a number we pulled out of the hat. So yeah, doing some research, I think would make a big difference.
Thank you. Again, John.
And if I could just add to that, as a previous supervisor, someone who's been in these experiences, the quote-unquote 1 hour or 2 hours of commitment to an individual or a group are much bigger than that. I don't just walk into an individual supervision and say, here's your hour and we're done. As a qualified supervisor, you're also reviewing notes, you're looking through things, you're bringing up subjects that might be growth-oriented for your supervisees. So it's not just that 1 hour, and that's why when we're looking at this particular model, I would be concerned about, yay, we'll make the number the same for everybody, but we're not actually recognizing the commitment and work from the supervisor side of the equation.
Well taken. Thank you. Any comments from our audience, members of the audience?
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW, California. I won't bring up that more complicated because I actually had gone ahead in my comments into this area of the agenda. But just to point out, and I'm sure you're thinking of this, I mean, I do agree that I think everybody desires this to be a little easier to understand, which would result in the same number. But the problem is what you were talking about is overburdening the supervisor, finding people who are unwilling to become supervisors if their agency is going to make them take 8 supervisees if we went to 8. But then on the other hand, if we made it 6 for everybody, then it's just making it harder for the people gaining hours to find a supervisor. So it's such a hard question, and I just wanted to point out both sides.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Ben Caldwell, MFT, and I agree with everything that Rebecca was saying. It's certainly complicated in the sense that any change is going to have a variety of impacts, some probably good and some probably less good. I am curious to know, is there any particular data on supervision-related complaints since that change from 3 to 6 supervisees in non-exempt settings? Have you noticed, even if anecdotally, an increase in supervision-related problems?
I can say I don't think we haven't looked at that in the data and stuff, so I can't really comment on that. But yeah, no, that is actually an interesting way. That's something maybe we could look at to help out.
That just might be a useful indicator of whether some kind of a change is necessary. But just from the information that's in front of us, agreed that simplicity would be better if it's achievable. But there are so many other things tied in here that the numbers as they are right now don't appear to be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any other conversation, comments? Okay, moderator, can we please open to the public if there are any specific comments in regards to this agenda item?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate and logged in, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. So at this time, I do not see any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, so we do not suggest a motion for this item as Roseanne anticipated, so I think we can move on and away from this agenda item that was number 4. So we're now moving agenda item number 5, which has to do with the discussion and possible recommendation regarding required display of license or registrations. Thank you again, Roseanne.
Thanks, Max. So right now, all licensees and registrants of the board receive a paper copy of their license or registration with the board when they become licensed or registered. And that copy on it contains the person's name, their license number, their type of license, and the expiration date. The law currently requires that they display this license in a conspicuous place in their primary place of practice. The law was likely written this way to ensure a client could walk into their therapist's office, see that they actually had a license or registration. It was displayed right there on the wall or on the check-in table, and when they're there for their appointment. However, that's not quite the way the world works anymore in terms of therapy. The increased use of telehealth raises the question of whether this law needs updating. Some therapists' primary place of practice might be virtual, making it difficult to display, quote unquote, conspicuously. So the question becomes how do we update this for the world that we're living in now? So if we look at current law, there's not necessarily any other place in current law that requires all licensees and registrants to provide a license or registration number when they begin services with a client. There is in some circumstances, but it's not universal for all of them. MFT associates are an exception. They are required to provide their license number plus some other additional information about their employment and supervision situation. That's in statute. However, it's not in place for other associates. All licensees and registrants are required to provide their license or registration number and type of license or registration when they initiate telehealth services with the client, but then not everything is telehealth, and so somebody might be practicing in both arenas. Additionally, all licenses and registrants are required by the current law to include their license or registration number in advertisements. But there's no requirement every time somebody provides services, no matter what license or registrant type they are, to say, I'm this license type, here's my license number, here's my expiration date. So we discussed this at the telehealth committee meetings in last December and last March, and the committee looked at some options and directed staff to draft language, updating the license or registrant display language to provide other options for providing the client with their license or registration number, type, and expiration date each time services are provided if a physical display is not possible. A physical display is an option in the proposal, but it's not the only option. And so that language is shown in Attachment A. And then also, in addition, in Attachment A, there is one other additional amendment we're proposing. LCSW statute, for some reason, contains an additional requirement that they display the current renewal receipt. We believe that that language is obsolete. The board's other 3 practice acts do not have it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because when somebody renews their license or registration, we send them a new copy, and so they would display that copy. So we recommend that Business and Professions Code 4996.8 be deleted. And then I just want to make a couple of notes. We'll discuss Attachment A, but separately, this kind of leads into a larger discussion, which I want to set up for a future meeting. The committee should note that if it approves the proposed language in Attachment A, a statute change is automatically going to override a portion of the telehealth regs that says that the license or registration number be provided upon initiation of telehealth services only. So it would need to be, if this law change goes through, we would need to kind of update the telehealth regs as well, which we're already planning on doing at the next telehealth committee meeting. We're going to be looking at those again. So just know that there's future cleanup that would be needed there. And then more so, this kind of leads into a larger sort of discussion, I think, with our advertising regulations and what information must be provided to clients. So I kind of wanted to set that up as that I think, you know, it would be nice to dive a little bit deeper into what information must be disclosed and where, and getting all of that in the appropriate places in statute and regulation. So at the next meeting, I would propose that if this language is approved, we continue the discussion and kind of more focusing on advertising and what's in statute and what's in regulation.
Thank you, Roseanne. I do have a question. So is the telehealth committee addressed, so I was just wondering, would that be a complication for every time we are providing clinical services, let's say remotely through a different platform, right? That the licensed person will, in addition to their name, put on their screen their license number and the expiration date. Just because it's permanent, they have to do it once. So every time they connect, they actually broadcast the information to their clients. Was that ever discussed, or?
I'd be interested in hearing from our stakeholders. The way that it's written right now, I think that the thought was that it can be, there's 3 different options in the way Attachment A is written. It can be either a display, like at a physical location, if they're in person. You can provide the client with the information verbally, but you can also provide the client with required information via written text. So I think that at the beginning, I think most telehealth platforms, and the stakeholders can correct me if I'm wrong, usually there's something that comes up where you're connecting with your clinician and it says their name and their license number, so they could just add in their expiration date as well, and then it would just be there on the screen at one point when the client was checking in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are different ways, like even through the intake forms process, you're seeing this person's license is this and this and that, and that could be another way too. But I was just curious if that was a conversation in the licensing committee.
It would be interesting to get feedback on if the way that it's worded would be problematic for telehealth, but I believe that the way that, and I'm not expert on various telehealth platforms, but I believe that can be done automatically where there can be a screen that shows.
I know a couple of them, and anyway. Okay, any other questions, observations, comments from the board? Any members of the public?
Ben Caldwell, MFT. Roseanne, thank you very much for this. This is good, elegant language. It seems to address this with a great amount of flexibility. To the discussion about telehealth platforms, I've used multiple telehealth platforms, and they all have at least some kind of mechanism for exactly what you're talking about. I think about it as being as simple as like renaming yourself on a Zoom meeting. You can make it that automatic. I also like that the flexibility here takes into account things like a therapist doing a walk and talk session, or maybe somebody who is providing services at a school instead of at their regular office. They're still making sure to provide that licensure or registration information to each client at each session in a way that I think would become, pretty rote, pretty routine. But the flexibility here is great. Thank you for attending to this so well.
Thank you, Ben.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW, California. I'll just concur with everything Ben just said, and also to say that the technical fix for the LCSWs, that's okay with us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Moderator, can we see if there are any comments on this agenda item?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square and type comments sent to all panelists, or press *3 to raise your hand if you're calling in. I do have an individual identified as Laura DeSantis. I'm going to send a request to mute your microphone.
Hi there, Laura DeSantis, LPCC. I have some concerns about this this phrasing as someone who has done telehealth with clients since before the pandemic, and to talks with other clinicians regularly about telehealth laws. I really feel like this is incredibly cumbersome, and I think it's really important to think about what the intent of what we're doing here is. If the intent is that people know about their clinician's license number so they can file a complaint, then really this should be addressed in informed consent laws, where it should be required that every associate trainee, I mean, trainees don't have numbers, but licensees and associates give their license number at the beginning, because we're also required to give the complaint notice. So it doesn't really do any good to give a complaint notice and people not have a license number to report. So if the intent is that people have that information for that purpose, then it should already be done. But I think right now, as this is crafted, what's being created is a law that people are not going to follow, unfortunately. I just don't see clinicians at the beginning of every single telehealth session, in addition to everything else we have to do, giving this information. And I think that the telehealth platforms are not quite as flexible as are being presented. I mean, I can only speak for Simple Practice on my end. Yes, you can change the name, but there's character limit. There's a limit on how much of that is displayed from the client's end. And I just think I think it's really important to think about intent here, and also to create a rule that people are going to follow, because that is really for the protection of our clients. And I just wanted to name that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other comments, moderator?
Oh, yes, we do have Kathy Atkins. Give me just a moment. Sent a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins with CAMFT. I wanted to, again, thank the committee and staff for working on this with the intent of trying to be flexible as we move away from the typical brick building way of working always. While I would say we agree that having to do this written at each session, I know that the board also has to weigh consumer protection as primary focus. And so CAMFT is fine with the language, given it includes the ability to verbally say the number. With it, I would agree that informed consent does tend to probably take care of 98% of these cases, but recognizing that the board does need to put consumer safety first, I do not think it is too overly cumbersome given the verbal inclusion at this time. So thank you.
The moderator, no further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Christy Shields. I'm Regulations Counsel for the board. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but use of the word via written text, I mean, I first saw it and thought it meant like a text message, like a, cell phone text message. So are you proposing could we just say in writing? I think a little bit unclear what text we're talking about, whether you're actually texting somebody something or if it's written down on a piece of paper or email. But if we just say in writing, I don't know if you're concerned about the method of delivery or medium. You could add detail about that, like if, a handout or a piece of paper or email or what you're talking, you could do that too. But if you just want it to be in writing, then I would just say that. I don't know, maybe, like I said, I'm letting you check me and let me know if I'm overthinking it. But I first looked at it and I'm like, we're talking about texting somebody this information? I just wasn't sure. So can you fill me in?
I think if you're confused, a lot of people might be too. So I think it's a fair assessment because, in this era of technology, people might really think automatically another way of communications or only one way of communication. Thank you for that. I'm sure. Yeah, Roseanne.
I agree with Christy because it does, via written text is worded a bit awkwardly. I think the reason we did that versus saying in writing is because the thought was that it could be in writing on a screen, which is technically in writing, so I don't know if it's, but the thought it would be on the BetterHelp or whatever platform they're using, like it would pop up on the screen for the client. So I think in writing, via written text was kind of developed in that context, but I think in writing still fits the purpose, so we can see what the group thinks about that.
I mean, if you're concerned, if you want to limit, like I was saying, mode or method of delivery, you'd want to put that in there, that it would have to be like on a piece of paper or on a screen, a static screen, that they, document it or sign off on it as receiving it. That would be more criteria I would recommend putting in a statute. Otherwise, we'd probably end up putting it in regulation because we probably get questions about, like, what is this sufficient, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to leave it open, then just in writing. But if you're thinking about it needs to be in a specific method or mode of delivery, then I would put that in the statute as well. I don't know if Ms. Knight has any ideas. Maybe she's seen a few of these. I don't know.
I actually thought the same thing about that text. I couldn't figure out what it meant. I mean, I figured out what it meant, but so it like everybody's saying, we should be clarifying, or everything we're trying to do is clarify. I was trying to find another way to say, because I understand where the medium is visually, it's going to be there somewhere. But any kind of in writing, because it can be a piece of paper, it could be in the informed consent, it could be anywhere, right? And on the screen. So, however we can capture it all, I'm all for it.
Okay, looks like we're all good on that, and thank you again. But John Savick.
So in public comment, there was the question about burdensomeness of the phrase "each time services are provided." And as a clinician, I'm kind of sitting with that and realizing that there are, in the original intent of all of this, I would have my license on a bookshelf and it would always be there. Someone could see it, they could refer to it. But in a model where I'm doing either phone or doing video, it does create kind of an awkward entrance into a clinical setting that I'm now required to keep track of, that I do every single time when I have that contact with that client. So I'm wondering if we might look at something where during intake or initial client contact and then on each renewal. That might be a way to make it less burdensome on clinicians, because it does have a certain awkward energy to it if I'm required to say this every single time when I'm using one of these alternative mediums. And I know we're talking about other ways it could show up, changing my name on my Doxy account and stuff like that. But you're going to have some clinicians who are going to want to think about letter of law, and suddenly they're going to say, wow, and I have to do this every single time. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to create a version of it that has a little bit more flexibility to it, such as on initial contact or during intake and on each renewal period. Just something to consider in this process.
Thank you, John. Roxanne, would you like to, perhaps there's a conversation that already came up, so I don't know if you have any inputs on that, or if the language was really intended to identify every single session, every single contact, or was just in regulations to the client and clinician's relationship?
It was when the discussion happened last time, it was kind of decided that it kind of came to the conclusion they wanted it every time. Right now, the telehealth regs don't do that. But maybe, I mean, we could change, we're trying to figure, I mean, we could require it if it's telehealth. I mean, it kind of changes. I mean, we're trying to update the display of the license. So how is that displayed? And in telehealth, there's no display. So I think we're kind of focusing on that. You know, maybe there's an option that if it's telehealth, then we say, you know, it's on initial intake or something like that. I don't know exactly how that would look. We probably have to.
Well, expanding that, I mean, in all of my intake communication with clients as a clinician, all of that information is in every single piece of paperwork that was back and forth between us. And so a lot of that is already in play in a lot of informed consent pieces and stuff like that. So I'm thinking, because already I'm checking in with when I do a telehealth situation, where is your location? You know, do you have confidentiality? All those things that I'm already asking, and now I'm layering on top, oh, and by the way, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. My license is every single time that screen pops up. And I'm just looking at it as being a little bit cumbersome to actual creating like therapeutic alliance. And is there ways that we can look at creating, I will provide you with the information, you will always have it, because when I send you your intake form, you have the signed copy of it in your files as well too. So that information is always there, okay? Because I send it out, they sign it, we all have copies of it, and all of that information is always there. So I'm just thinking from this very clinical, creating therapeutic alliance setting, all of a sudden my opening spiel every time gets longer and longer and longer and longer. And how are we actually saying, how are you doing?
Right.
Like initiating to that. So is there a way to create more flexibility? Once again, intake, initial contact, and then each renewal, because that's addressing some of the things you're asking here without making it like interfering with clinical connection.
Where my mind's going, I'm wondering if, because we started out in trying to do this, our telehealth regulations already, the law doesn't address what's in an initial intake anywhere, but in our telehealth regs, we require the license or the license number to be provided at the beginning of telehealth services. And then separately, where this started is we have this other section that basically says a licensee shall display his or her license in a conspicuous place, which is not necessarily possible to have the paper license displayed. So maybe we make this, instead of doing what we've drafted here, we change it to focus more on in-person services where we have telehealth. We already have telehealth regs in place where that is, but make this particular section more focused on in-person services.
Well, just for for clarification to those of us that are not clinicians, so I can just speculate on this, but what are the different interactive ways that clinicians can communicate with their clients in a therapeutic session? So we know obviously the in-person, the telehealth through video, and then I believe there is the phone. And John Sovak, I'm looking at you. Yeah.
And this is John Sovak. If you are looking at, there's some clinical settings where text is also being used, and there's also texting through platforms. So if you're using something like a Simple Practice, you're then texting through their platform itself. So that's a different alliance than you and I texting back and forth through my professional office number. So there are lots of layers to how these communications are happening. And there are probably more than I'm not thinking of.
Right. Abigail?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I like that there are different methods to communicate this information. I do believe, like, it should be stated more than, like, just in the intake, because it's, I mean, it's so many, so much documentation. It's not like people always, you know, people need to, like, hear things more than once. But I'm thinking, like in the language that it could be, like, at least, you know, at least one time where you have to state it, right, which is in the intake, and that there could be language around, like, the therapist making, like, good faith, you know, efforts to communicate this to the client periodically. I mean, it could even be during, like, the review of the treatment plan, which a lot of us, you know, do, like, every 3 months, right, when you I mean, for me, it's like in my signature line with my email, like, you know, I already display it. It's on my website. It's on all my documentation. It's in my invoices, right? Like my LCSW, like, number, and all of that is, like, it's constantly there in as many places as I see, you know, it's possible. So yeah, I think it's, like, a good faith effort to, like, know that you communicated it, you know, more than once. But ultimately, right, like, if this is consumer protection, like, it's also, like, about the consumers, like, knowing to ask or, like, expecting this information to be shared, because, like, I've heard of a lot of clients that, like, go to, like, the neighbor, you know, like the la vecina, and that person isn't licensed, so they also don't know to ask. So, like, educating the public on, like, oh, by the way, you know, if you're seeing a mental health professional, ask them, you know, what their number is and what their expiration number is. So I also see some, like, PSA around that.
Thank you. I just also would like to add that thank you for bringing about from the consumer perspective too, because it's also, I'm thinking about clinical settings where there are more therapists, you know, community clinics, or where all of a sudden an individual are seeking for clinical services. They're in the intake form. Sometimes what happens is that you don't even know who you're going to see, so you don't have the license of the therapist. You do the intake forms, you know, insurance stuff and everything else, and then they assign you to an individual. So sometimes what we hear that people meet people, they don't even know almost who they are, because you trust the agency, which is great, but it might not be enough. I mean, now I'm thinking even in personal experience, when I seek for a therapist that was through Kaiser, they assigned me to someone I never even was introduced, barely to their name or their license number. I needed to trust Kaiser that was a valid, reliable clinical interactions, right? So I think it also looks at those settings where people don't have that one-on-one relationship, like going to a private therapist and you are sure about the experience and the clinical settings and so forth, but in a bigger settings, I can see how that actually, it does happen every day, that you interact with clinicians which you had never seen what the license number is, because you trust the agency, which could be good, but at the same time, that could be also where the problem lies. I don't know. But to me, taking into consideration all different contexts, it's really important too. I think we have to go to the audience to see, back to the audience to see if there are any comments. Yes? No?
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I mean, I initially said I didn't have a problem with the language that was written, but I also really liked what you said, John, and that does make sense to me, and it does make sense that it could be awkward to say that every time and kind of interfere with just the rapport you're building with the client, as long as they do have that information all the time. So I do think that also seems reasonable to me.
Ben Caldwell, MFT, I would concur with that. I mean, the language as drafted is fine. I don't believe that it would be cumbersome in a telehealth environment to do that just on a screen that comes up automatically. But in terms of consumer protection, it would seem like the consumer protection goal is adequately furthered if you provide that information on intake. And whether it really provides an additive benefit to do it again at every single session versus having that information available readily at the beginning. And of course, people can look you up on Breeze anytime they want to. So, you know, is it worth that impact on the clinical relationship, small as it might be? I think either way is probably okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any other comments, Roseanne?
I have a suggestion.
I just want to add one more thing, Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW, California. I could see, you know, we looked at the language and you saw where it was lacking, because when it said display the license, we were only thinking about in-person situations, but I also wonder if we're tackling a problem that's not really there. Like if there's been a lot of complaints about this, people who are on telehealth are feeling that they're not getting this information because they should be on intake. And so, yeah, just concerned that we're not really tackling a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And Roxanne, I know you wanted to add.
I'm just thinking about what direction we could go with this, because we do have the problem with the current language. It says they have to display their license in a conspicuous place in the licensee's primary place of practice. People are out of compliance with that because it doesn't make sense anymore. So I wonder if we maybe go more toward looking at deleting that, but looking more at the code section where our licensees are required to give a notice and when they initiate psychotherapy services with a client. And basically that notice says something to the effect of, you know, the board regulates therapy. You may contact the board at this address or number. I'm wondering if we look toward more wording like on that form, it's more, this is my name, this is my license type, this is my license number. I don't know that we could do expiration date because it would be on initiation. We can't, I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to every year give them a new notice, but maybe we look at somehow wording, and I don't know exactly how it would fit into that section, but maybe we bring back a suggestion for doing it, for deleting the obsolete section in law about displaying a license and more providing the information that's on a license. I don't know that we would want to make them provide a copy of the license, but we could, although that could have an address on it. But anyways, maybe just providing it in a notice to clients that they're already giving anyways.
Yes, John Salk.
So I don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater, because the committee has been working on this since last year. And I think this is so close to being something that could move forward and be really effective. So I don't want to throw away all of the work that you all have done so far in an effort to try and make this, I don't know what.
No, I don't think that you would be throwing it away, because we're basically kind of going in a different direction. We're basically saying, we're keeping the first paragraph, but we're just moving where it is. We're going to move it somehow into the code section that talks about required notice to clients. And so the first paragraph would pretty much stay the same. It's just we're going to be getting rid of where it's the options, the three options. So I don't think That's the next best solution, because I'm hearing a lot of like intake forms require it in intake. We don't have a specific section that says at intake you must do X, Y, and Z, but we do have this requirement that at intake you provide this notice. So that notice could include this information that we've already specified. I don't see a problem. I don't feel like it's throwing away a lot of work, because you know, if it's going to be problematic, then it's going to continue to be problematic. So we might as well correct course and think of a better solution.
So just trying to interpret that. So if we had to make a motion, will be in support of the attachment 8 with the substantial changes, with the non-substantial changes that you just proposed?
I would say direct staff to direct staff to look into amending the required notice to clients in lieu of the proposed in attachment A, and bring back to P&A committee.
Okay.
For further review.
I like that motion. I'll make it. Any second?
I'll second.
Wendy Strack, seconds. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any comments from members of the public? No. Moderator, can you please open and see if there are any comments on the motion on the floor?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Type the word comment into the text field and make sure it goes to all panelists before clicking the send button. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor coming back to the board, to the P&A committee, excuse me. I think we are ready to vote. Christine? Thank you.
Max Desposi?
Yes.
John Sovic?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Wonderful. So we're taking 10 minutes break, reminding that item agenda 6 is not discussed today. So when we return 1:50, we're going to open on agenda item number 7. Thank you. Okay, so we're resuming the Policy of Advocacy Committee. My name is Max Desposi. I'm the chair of this committee, and July 21st, 1:53. As a reminder, agenda item 6 is not longer, so we're moving directly to agenda item number 7, which is discussion and possible recommendation regarding changes to enforcement regulations for unprofessional conducts, amount of fine, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe that it's the time for, Roxanne is not leading this one.
Right.
So Christine is next. Thank you. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you. This one's a little more simple than what we've been talking about, thankfully. This was originally brought to P&A back in January, and I think actually in October last year as well, as a part of a combined agenda item where we're looking at disciplinary guidelines. But we decided to split this out just to kind of, because the disciplinary guidelines item is so big, and this one's a little more minor. So the proposed changes would just strike some regulation language that duplicates our statute, so it's unnecessary. Why have it twice? Then we would, the other thing that it would do is bring in a statute regarding within the Confidentiality of Medical Information Act, which is not part of the board statutes, but that do apply. But for clarity, what we want to do is in our citation and fine regulations, would bring that reference in there to ensure that that section in the civil code is considered when levying a fine or issuing an order of abatement, because that section requires it puts a certain amount on the fine. So we would have to say that the fine that we issue cannot exceed the amount specified in that Confidentiality of Medical Information Act. So those are really the two things that this proposed language would do.
Wonderful, Chris. Thank you for that, Chrissy Berger. Do we have any comments from our board members? Or questions? Doesn't seem like. Comments from members in the audience? No? And moderator, if you can please open to see if there are any comments from the public.
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. At this time, I do not see requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. So at this point, I see any possible recommendations for this agenda item, unless there are any comments. I hear some. Are we good, Chrissy? Yes, please.
So we're asking for the committee to make a motion to approve make a motion to recommend to the board to approve the text and direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed language and provide the language to the board for consideration as a regulation proposal at the next board meeting.
Yeah, I was about to read that. Thank you. For once, I found it. Thank you so much. Yes, I definitely, anyone would like to make that motion on the board? I can make that motion. Any seconds?
John Sovek, second.
Thank you, John. So we have a motion on the floor. Just for procedures, we're going to the members of the public, audience present, if there are any comments about the motion. I don't see any. Moderators, can you please open to see if there are any comments on the motion just made?
Yes, the Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. Click that question mark, type comments, send it to all panelists, or press *3 if you're calling in. I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. And we have, again, back on the board, we have a motion on the floor, so no further discussion. Doesn't look like. So Christine, please call the vote.
Max Desposi?
Yes.
John Sovek?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're moving now to the discussion and possible recommendation regarding changes to enforcement regulations, uniform standards related to substance abuse and disciplinary guidelines. I believe that's Roseanne. Oh, it's Christy again. Okay, so sorry.
That's okay. No
Yes.
worries. No worries. So this has been brought to the committee a couple times as well. And just for a little bit of background for the audience who may be unfamiliar, it's the uniform standards related to substance abuse portion of the disciplinary guidelines document is based on the uniform standards created via some legislation that required the Department of Consumer Affairs to develop uniform standards. And the disciplinary guidelines are, the requirements that the board follows when placing licensees under probation, considering discipline. So this cover memo is going to just focus on areas that have changed significantly since the proposal was brought back to, since the proposal was last seen by the committee. But the proposed language itself shows all of the changes that are being proposed and would move forward if approved today. Yes. Yeah. So the first set of change would be to Section 1888 and the uniform standards. So that's in attachments A and C. And it's just clarifying some of the language to state that if a violation involves drugs and alcohol as opposed to the abuse of drugs and alcohol, then the violation is presumed to be a substance abuse violation. So the prior language had said abuse of, and now it's just going to say if it involves. If the licensee does not successfully rebut that presumption, then the uniform standards apply. And so that is in the actual regulation code section 1888 and within that uniform standards document that is incorporated into the regulations. In addition, the quarterly report form that's required to be submitted by probationers has been incorporated into this section by reference, and we'll talk about the changes to the quarterly report form as well. I'll stop periodically to get your feedback, so I think this is one section I will stop at to see if there's any comments on that. No?
Doesn't appear to, no? Okay.
All right. The next thing is that the proposed language now states that the standard terms and conditions of probation generally apply in all cases rather than must apply, because even though in the vast majority of cases all of the conditions, the standard terms and conditions apply, this now reflects the fact that there are occasional exceptions. Another thing that we've done is, and actually this is in the uniform standards and the disciplinary guidelines, we've now added clarification each time the word a certain number of days appears, whether it's calendar days versus business days, for clarity. What we found is in some places it would specify that, in other places it was not, and so just to avoid any confusion about what it means. So, now moving into the disciplinary penalty guidelines. I'm going to skip that first one, I just talked about that. So we're talking about now optional terms and conditions of probation. And for the psychological and psychiatric evaluation, actually, I'm going to cover psych evals, psychotherapy, clinical diagnostic evaluation, and supervised practice, because those all have some commonalities. So I'm going to kind of cover the points that have changed that apply to all of those real quick, and then I'll go back to the specifics. So for all of those, we are going to clarify that whoever fills that role of doing the evals or the psychotherapy or supervision, that they must not currently or previously be a supervisor of the respondent as a student, trainee, applicant, or associate. We're going to prohibit that person from having been the subject of a disciplinary action against their license. And when the probationer proposes who they want to do their evaluation or their therapy or their supervision, we're going to require that probationer to include a written statement describing how that proposed person meets the criteria for approval. So they're, to ensure that they have kind of gone through what all their requirements are and let us know how they meet those. So those are the ones that apply across the board to all of those. Then for the psychological and psychiatric evaluation, the ones specific to that have changed is specifying that the evaluator must have a minimum of 2 years of experience performing psych evals. And we also added that the release of information must include, shall authorize the evaluator to furnish the board with a current diagnosis. For psychotherapy, actually, we don't need to talk about that because it was those 3 generic things that I mentioned that apply to all. For clinical diagnostic evaluation, and those are primarily done for substance abuse violations, we would specify that the evaluator must be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And the release of information shall authorize the evaluator to furnish the board with a current diagnosis. And then one last piece on that is that we would specify a time frame for when a request for extension of the board's receipt of the evaluation must be sent. So we have language in there that says somebody can request to extend the time frame that's in there, say there's a delay in completing the evaluation. So now we've just been more specific about what that time frame is for receipt of that request. Under supervised practice, we are providing additional clarifications about how the respondent must proceed should their supervisor no longer be available. So it's basically just telling them you've got to find another supervisor within so many days that meets the same criteria. So I'll stop there and see if there's any feedback or questions.
Thank you. There is definitely a lot, even though it's not new to us, but
right.
Any, John Savek.
A question about the ROI. That's saying it will authorize the evaluator to furnish the board with a current diagnosis. In the way ROIs are written, sometimes they're general, sometimes they're specific. Should we somehow include language that actually notifies the person that diagnosis may be shared? because sometimes it's just general information, sometimes it's treatment planning, sometimes it's payment options, but specifically notify that can be part of the ROI. Is there a way to language that?
So the current language has a requirement that they consent, that they fill out all necessary paperwork to consent to the transfer of that information, and that they understand that they're authorizing the evaluator to, or therapist, or whoever the treating healthcare practitioner is, with a current diagnosis and a written report that contains certain information. So they have to sign off on all of that before, to comply with probation, first of all, and also to allow the board to legally access that information. So it's already either in there or being proposed to be added in these provisions. So anything in the documents that's underlined or struck through is new and proposed to be changed. Anything that's not either underlined or struck through is existing. So just when you're reviewing regulations, be aware that that's the situation. But that's typically how all probation works in the department. That's been my experience. We have that consent built into each condition of probation where there's medical information or other healthcare information being exchanged.
And as a clinician, also myself being aware that an ROI is a separate document, which does carry its own information as well, too. And so from my records, I keep all ROIs really specific, and I keep them on record for myself, because we're looking at confidentiality issues here and possible HIPAA ones, depending on how it's transferred.
Well, for example, on page 37, if you look at, it talks specifically about that second paragraph, the evaluators should furnish a written report to the board about their ability to practice safely. And then it says, respondent shall sign a release of information authorizing the evaluator to communicate with the board and to furnish the board with the current diagnosis and a written report regarding respondent's judgment and ability to practice safely. Respondent shall provide the evaluator with a copy of the board's decision prior to the evaluation being performed, and they shall comply with the recommendations, and it goes on from there. So does that address your concerns?
I'm going to say yes-ish.
Okay, so what is it that you think's missing? Because
I'm just concerned that the language of the ROI also needs to be specific, because it's going to be a separate signed document versus the document of consent that this can happen. The ROI is a very specific other document.
Right, so this...
Which includes, once again, informing the relationship of how information is going to be shared.
Right, so we typically don't get that prescriptive when it comes to the releases, because we want to make sure that essentially what we're doing is allowing them to communicate with us and furnish the information we need to do our proper evaluation to see if they're safe to continue practice. So I know releases of information contain a lot of other things, like the signature of each party and their addresses and their personal contact information. We usually don't put that in regulation, but it's up to the board. But like I said, we usually try to keep it to the bare minimum we need to make sure that what is communicated is the fact that they have to comply with executing that release, whatever that looks like, so that we can get the information and that information that's critically covered, which is the ability to communicate with us, furnish the board with a diagnosis and a written report about their judgment and ability to practice safely. So, but again, these are your regulations. We could do that for all of the terms and conditions here that use a release of information as a vehicle, if you like, but it would have to come back to staff to develop that text.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, John. Any other comments or questions from the board? From the member of the audience, if there are any comments? Thank you. Sorry to make you wait, because I was about to make a motion, but go ahead.
Becky Gonzalez, NASW, California. Actually, I'm sorry, this goes back to the very first part, the very first point that you made about involves drugs and alcohol instead of the abuse of drugs and alcohol. And I apologize if this has been discussed extensively at another meeting, but my concern here is it just makes it easier to have someone be in violation if you're changing the word from abuse to involves. And I guess I just wondered what the genesis of that was.
So, can I have the text?
Sure.
Your version there.
It's going to be in this one, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if your microphone's on.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so the when the regulations were first going through, the boards were presented with three options for implementation. One is the, what we call the rebuttable presumption trigger, that if the violation involved alcohol, that they would be presumed to be in violation, but that violation presumption could be rebutted by the applicant or, sorry, the licensee. And so the board chose the first option, which was that if the conduct found to be in violation involves drugs and alcohol, it's already, so that's existing text. This is not new.
Right,
this is existing regulation involves. It's presumed to be a substance abuse violation. So currently the way it's written is if the conduct found to be a violation, this is subdivision B of 1888, paragraph 3 on that page, if you look, that if the conduct found to be a violation involves drugs or alcohol, the violation is a substance abuse violation for purposes of section 315 of the code. So what we're saying is we're just putting the words presumed to be, because we want to make sure it's clear, and it doesn't really make sense the way it's currently written, that it's a presumption that's rebuttable.
Okay.
That can be rebutted by the licensee if they are, you know, they're able to put on their own argument or evidence that they're not an abuser, and then the presumption would be removed.
Okay.
From an evidentiary perspective. Does that make sense?
It does. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. This goes to, in the penalty guidelines, the newly added requirements for an evaluator, a supervisor, a therapist. One of those qualifications is that the person couldn't have ever been the subject of a disciplinary process, correct? A similar question. What's the genesis of that? Because that seems like it runs counter to our efforts to rehabilitate those who go through a disciplinary process, fulfill all of the requirements of that process, and then come back into full standing. This would seem to suggest that such an individual is maybe back in good standing, but never really fully regains the ability to do all of the things that they could have done previously.
I think that's because of what we're dealing with here in a disciplinary process for the person. That might be why. Not to say they can't do it in their career, but in this particular process because of the subject matter they're dealing with. But I'll see what Chrissy maybe also has to.
Right. So because we're dealing with public protection here, we want to make sure that the person who's acting sort of as the eyes and ears of the board in monitoring someone's judgment and ability to practice safely hasn't themselves, has not currently or previously been disciplined, is we want to make sure that we're actually involving those persons who are best situated to judge the person for whatever violation it might be. From the standpoint of public protection, we want to look for people that don't have a record of violating the law, because what we're trying to do is protect the public and enforce the law as written. And what discipline shows is that there has been a failure to understand that. And we want to make sure that people who are going to be monitoring those for the protection of the public, essentially for the board, in a probationary environment, are completely understanding that. And the best way to ensure that is to make sure they don't have record of discipline. And I would say that this is the common practice of the boards in the department, that when we have subject matter experts or evaluators, we eliminate those that have a record of discipline, particularly if it's in the area that's charged in the violation that they're reviewing for the board.
I think it would make logical sense if you're talking about maybe somebody who had a record, especially of a recent substance-related violation. But for somebody who might have had a minor disciplinary issue 20 years ago, what this language is saying is that we as a board will never fully trust you to be the eyes and ears on our behalf. And that, again, seems to go against the intention of the probation process of getting people to understand what happened, why it resulted in a disciplinary proceeding, and then to clean up their practices to a point where they are, again, responsible and in good standing. To say to a professional in that circumstance, you can never get our complete trust back, I think is problematic. It would make some sense to say, if you've had a history of substance-related violations, or if you've had a disciplinary violation within the past X number of years. But to say forever, I don't understand. Thank you.
So I just want to add that the courts have said that time is not the best barometer for whether someone's been completely rehabilitated. So we've used that in many of our petition cases as an explanation for why, even though it's been 20 years since a violation occurred, that person may be not internally rehabilitated completely. And so the purpose of regulation is to have bright line rules that are easy to implement and enforce for the protection of the public. And so the bright line rule here is, if you have a record of discipline, we would rather not use you as someone that's going to be evaluating someone else's failures in any area for the protection of the public, because it's shown when you have a violation, it shows that you have had a failure, either ethically or because drugs and alcohol are not the only reason, as you know, for someone to not be competent to practice or safe to practice because of judgment issues. So I think that the reason that all the boards in the department use that standard to eliminate people from consideration is because they don't want to take the risk and place the burden on staff of evaluating every single person's violation to see whether it might be comparable or might potentially subject someone to, potentially not having the best judgment in evaluating that person's rehabilitation for your protection. Because remember, that person's going to be reporting to you, yes, they're safe to practice. And I think that what we've seen over time with boards and in discipline cases is that it's at least consistently a safer option to have those without a record of discipline in the position of evaluating someone's safety and competency and ethics in regards to rehabilitation. So that's why we have that. And I understand all the points that have been made, and I think those are considerations for practice. But when we're talking about giving somebody a second chance and seeing whether they've been able to rise to the level of being safe to practice again, those are the considerations we use in determining somebody's ability to serve in a position, a neutral position, for the benefit of the public.
I see Rebecca.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW, California. I agree with what Ben is saying. I do think that lived experience is valuable, and it can make you a good evaluator. With AB 2138, we have 7 years as kind of a standard of time, and I would be in favor of that kind of solution.
Thank you. And yes.
So AB 2138 is for applicants only, not licensees. So in the legislative history for that bill, the reason they are doing it is to allow people that chance to start the process of being licensed. But when it was going through the legislature, they had added the provision and made it applicable to licensees as well, that we couldn't use criminal convictions that were older than 7 years. But they took that out because the concern was that we're giving them a first chance. And if there's a violation after they've been given that chance, the public protection mandates really weigh in favor of, allowing us to look at the breadth of violations and the depth and the history to determine whether someone's safe to practice. So I wouldn't recommend putting in a time frame for you, but it is your call as the decision makers. But I will tell you that the standard is usually no disciplinary history for the protection of the public.
Thank you. I just, it's definitely complex, even though this board in the past has addressed standardized approaches that were not always fitting. I'm not saying that this is not. It's just also an opportunity for us to review the possible, especially when it comes to use of alcohol and how even the state of California has moved forward into decriminalize certain approaches in regards to penalties and long-term stigmatized sometimes, dynamics that have prevented people from recovery and so forth. But I don't have an alternative language, but I do think it's fair to look into the approaches that are more also in taking in consideration the consumer protections, because it is our role, no matter what our personal opinions are, but at the same time, how that also can be applicable in terms of in protecting the consumer, though. Is this an element that will jeopardize that, right? An alternative language will actually compromise the consumer protection, perhaps will add another element. So I don't think, I opened the conversation. If there are any other comments? We definitely don't have a motion at the moment. One of the recommendations was to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed language and recommend the board for consideration of regulations proposal. That's the directions that we were going. But I would like to hear from the audience that's connected with us to see if there are any other inputs. And moderator, if you can please open. Thank you.
Moderator, the Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click that question mark, type comments, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. I do see individual Kathy Atkins. I'm going to send a request to mute your microphone.
Kathy Atkins from CAMT. I wanted to thank everybody for the discussion, and I think there's been some interesting points raised. I'm not sure if we're continuing to go through the other points or if this is closing out this agenda item. So I guess I'll just say there are some aspects that I think we would want to revisit and possibly make comment on at the board when they take a look at this, because I do believe some comments raised today have some value with being further assessed, at least by CAMP. So thank you everyone for the opportunity to listen and learn.
Thank you.
No additional requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
If there is no one else, we can close. Thank you. Is any comments from the board? As a reminder, I think that obviously we're going into the board with this discussion. Perhaps go ahead.
Yeah,
Chrissy.
and I still have more to cover here, but yes, obviously,
How did I miss that?
I know. And yes, the hope was that this could go to the board, and there, we could leave something, obviously would be discussed there as well. And they'll get the full memo. This is just covering what we,
Right, what we've done.
Yeah, so I'm assuming there will be discussion and changes at board level. So I think that's, kind of a given for this document. So, but yeah, I'll continue on with what's here. We got a little ways to go, so, but most are pretty straightforward. So the next piece, sure.
So, my recommendation generally is if you have strong feelings about something, make changes now so that we're not making them on the fly at the board meeting, so to speak. The job of the committee is kind of to do the heavy lifting of ferreting out those issues you think from a policy perspective that you don't like. So you can do what we've just discussed and just move it to the board for more in-detail discussion, but if there is something that you fundamentally don't like or want to add, I would recommend it be done here. It's because it's a lot easier for staff to fix and change things in the materials in preparation for the board meeting rather than be at the board meeting and try to make changes, right? So, I mean, if you're not feeling that way, that's fine, but I just want to bring that up.
No, I appreciate the
perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate the insight. It's also true that obviously not always a concept of this agreement might be completely formed. So even though the P&A is a place where, or any other committee, where we can actually, take most of the work, but I feel like that there is a sense of concern that is not fully developed. So I just wanted to make room for that because I do feel that is a valid consideration that brought from our representations here. So thank you for that, because that's definitely a good reminder. Definitely we want to facilitate the work of the staff, but I don't think we are in one way or another yet ready. And perhaps going to the public will allow us to form a better perspective on that. So thank you, though. Yes, John Thomas.
And another thing too, I have strong feelings about the no disciplinary action piece, but I think bringing that to the full board, especially with more clinical people there, will help me also get more perspective on it from that point of view. So it's not just my opinion, but we're also getting a wider range of what will be best for both public protection and also all of the people under our jurisdiction and the stakeholders. So I would like us to pointedly bring that to the bigger board discussion. But I don't think I'm in a place right now to make a move for an amendment or a change in it without getting more voices of people who are actually feet on the ground doing this work as well.
Okay, and we are not done with this item, as Christine was saying. She's trying. Thank you, Christine.
No problem. So the next piece is making a change when a probationer is required to complete some education pertaining to their violation. So this latest would just provide some examples of acceptable instructional modes and methods. So it's just clarifying what we would accept in terms of how a person takes their class. For the recovery support program term and condition, the latest amendments would we decided we needed to go back and make sure that our disciplinary guidelines are matching up with the uniform standards. And so we just had to make some small changes to make sure that it was still in line, that it was in line with what the uniform standards say. The next thing is to just be clear about what we want from the respondent in terms of the information they provide to their probation monitor about what they're proposing. So things like, the recovery reports, the program's location, contact information, and the program's elements and methods for providing recovery support. We updated the acceptable types of proof of attendance. We kind of fleshed that out a little better. And then we deleted, there was a proposed requirement that we deleted that it originally had said that they must continue attending the group for the duration of probation unless notified by the board otherwise. Our probation manager said that respondents with this term would always be required to attend for the duration of their probation, unless, of course, somebody petitioned to the board for a change to their probation. In that case, this section does not need to say that because of that way that process works. For the rehabilitation program term, originally we were going to add and monitoring, so it's going to say rehabilitation and monitoring program. We decided to remove that because that's not really what those programs are called. They're rehabilitation programs, and they do monitor participants in terms of their attendance and use of substances, but they don't call themselves that. So it's just to avoid confusion when the respondent's attempting to locate a program that meets the board's requirements. Under the term for abstention from drugs and alcohol and submitting to drug and alcohol testing, we'd gone to using the phrase controlled substances, and our guidelines actually were kind of inconsistent about whether it said drugs and alcohol or controlled substances. So we just changed everything to say drugs and alcohol, just to be really clear, and also because there are drugs that are not controlled substances that can be abused. there's some over-the-counter medications and things like that. The other thing that we did was clarify that abstention from the consumption of drugs and alcohol is required. So that just kind of tweaking that wording a little bit about, I think before it said intake, and this is a little bit of a better word. For someone who has to take a law and ethics course, it's kind of like we did with education. We just said what are the acceptable instructional modes and methods. So that might be another good stopping place to see if there's comments.
Yeah, I see something getting ready, but.
I have to find the section. Just a question, because with the uniform standards piece that we're trying to bring in alignment with, in 7, attend recovery support programs.
Yes.
This phrase about requiring respondent to provide information, location, contact information, programs elements. Contact information may be an unfulfillable requirement.
Oh.
Because if I'm going to a support type program, there often will be no specific contact information, or those people may not want to share their contact information because these are confidential, Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, pieces like that. So that might be something that we would be asking our people to do, that they actually would not be able to find a specific contact person unless they're giving the generalized national website or the generalized 800 number.
So like AA meetings and things like that.
There is, yeah, you can't, I can't reach out and contact you to see anything. There's no number to call.
Right.
And that's respecting the confidentiality of the participants in those programs.
Here. What is it about?
I guess we were just trying to gather identifying information to validate they actually went. So what other method of validation could we use besides contact information and their elements and methods?
So in the next statement, you say that acceptable types of proof of attendance. So we are looking at those regular things signed by the secretary of the meetings and pieces like that that we've been using currently that are ways saying that they have attended.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but this is the prior approval piece. So like for the prior approval, how do we know, like, they're a valid program, they didn't just like make it up on their computer and do some fancy graphics. You know what I'm saying? So how do we independently confirm that that's a true recovery support program? What kind of detail could we ask for to say, oh yeah, that's a program? I think the location piece is just like, oh, we can actually confirm that it exists. So that's kind of what I was trying to give staff.
So the only piece on that could happen is if staff did due diligence and, hey, I'm going to the one in Covina that meets on Wednesday nights, they can go to the National Directory site and find those meetings. All of that is very straightforward and out there. That's something I could prove. I could take a screenshot and say, I'm going to the Covina Wednesday night meeting. What I probably cannot provide you is an actual phone number or contact information of someone there that says this is a valid program. So that's something I, as someone, once again, in support programs, we're looking at things like Smart Recovery, AA, NA, things like that. So the very nature of the program, there's no one to call. So we're asking someone for a burden of proof that they can actually provide. They can provide, once again, a screenshot of here on the meeting site, it says there's this meeting at this time and that's the one that I'd like to go to. And on that same screenshot, here's the type of program I'm going to. It's a Smart Recovery. These are their things that they do. But there's nobody I can call. There's nobody I can call.
What's the process that they use to sign up for this program? I mean, how does someone find a program?
You don't sign up.
People just show up.
Like, I know, but how do you find out about the program?
So if I'm looking to attend, let's say, Alcoholics Anonymous, I go to the website. In there, they have a meeting directory. I look for something local at a time and date that feels available to me, and then I walk in the door and I attend that meeting.
So maybe a
website address? Would that be acceptable to collect, website address?
It
or
could
telephone
be, once
number,
again,
or telephone number if applicable. I think we're just trying to avoid fraud here, and like that they're actually doing something, not just So there would be, there's the attendance sheets, but before we approve it as like an option, we need to be able to confirm that it's authentic somehow. And I'm just trying to find the criteria to use for that.
I know.
Does someone have any other thoughts on this? Because I feel like I'm not conveying.
So I can say maybe.
This is regulations, so we have to be
specific.
We can't be.
Max here, I don't. So also in the journey of recovery, usually in all the hundreds of cases we have witnessed, there is always an intention. Like when there is not an intention, sometimes people even tell us that it's like, that the recovery groups is not really for me because it doesn't do anything to me. But for others, that might save their life. The existence of recovery groups are dynamic of self-help with others and they are not institutionalized, for lack of a better word. So even actually the directory, to be honest, very questionable because I'm a service provider. I also provide those groups. And sometimes people can call us not to inquire about who is there. We will never release because we don't even know, but it's more about does this group exist. So some nonprofit, the whole that might be, but it's not the same for everyone. Sometimes it's at the beach where people are meeting or at the park to do a recovery group. So even the national directory, just for clearance, it's not an official. Some people report it to the national directory because they want to gain more participants. Others don't. It's not a requirement for them to be listed in order to be a legit group. So there are actually, is the nature per se of the group that it's not valid versus others that are not valid. It's really self-created among the recovery community. So that's why it's very difficult to legislate around to define what's legit and what's not.
So why would contact information be unhelpful? Because there's lots of ways to contact, right? To find out how would you find out about going somewhere if you can't
Could be a
contact
website or sometimes the organization that hosts this meeting. So it could be a group of friends, but usually don't tend, it's not always the case though, I have to say. It's more like, because a lot of these groups are really community-based, and maybe I know about my neighborhood, how many there are there, but I don't know the one a mile away from here. So there is not a way out they're regulated. So that's why I think the challenge is really we don't want to introduce something that doesn't even exist or always exist that it could create a burden.
So a website or phone number might not exist?
But also if you have a phone number, let's say if you call MySpace and you're trying to inquire about someone going to AAA, that would be a violation for me to say. I could only say, yes, we have a group here, that's it.
Well, we're not asking for that. We're asking for criteria to validate the approval before they go. So I'm just saying before they go, how do we say, yes, that's a recovery program and not just you on your friend's couch?
I don't think there are metrics to define
that. That's not necessarily a problem we've run across in the.
Because we're looking at a program, not.
And what I'm suggesting is a person can provide location. I'm going to the Covina Wednesday night program of AA. All of those things could be provided. It's the contact information piece that is a requirement I could not fulfill for you if I was under discipline and had this in my thing. I could not provide you with a contact information, a person or a phone number by the very nature of the program. I can provide you with location, time of meeting, and I'm doing NA, and these are the program elements. That I can provide you with. But it is an impossible requirement to ask me to give you contact information.
So your proposal is to delete contact information, but leave location and information about the program's elements and methods for providing recovery support.
That is fulfillable, but the contact information is not.
What about website if applicable? And that, because like you said, if there's a list of locations on the website, if they list the locations, if available.
Once again, if I'm deciding to attend Max's group at his organization and it's not listed on the national directory, then once again, I cannot provide you with what you're asking of me.
If applicable, if available.
Maybe that.
Website address, if available, in lieu of contact information.
Yeah, in Southern California, they are all on the beach and the park, so there's I don't know.
I'm just trying to make it so it's a way that we
we're not trying to get the location of the meeting. We're trying to get the location, like information about the program, just generally, not about like each location they're having a support group meeting. I don't know, maybe I'm not communicating correctly, but this part of it is just like, is this a program, not just something somebody made up, and it's not really a program?
I think it's, I'm sorry to, is that the nature of these groups is sometimes they come and go, some last 6 months, some last 10 years. It's hard to define it. This is a program not based on, there are no criteria to define when that program is a valid one versus one that is not. So I understand the struggles. I'm not trying to challenge that. It's more about the nature per se. These groups, that they're not standardized besides the 12-step programs. Okay. Some are. But it could be difficult for that. I think the place, like John Savak was saying, identifying a place and a time and a day could be enough information to know that it's in existence. But some can provide a website, others don't.
So would it be acceptable to strike contact information, replace the website address if available? Or you just want to strike it all together?
Just can't do it, right? If it's not available, if available, and there it can't hurt to have it there, because they don't have to fill it out if it's not.
No, they don't.
It's just for internal.
It's just if they have it, then the staff can just look it up pretty easily and see that, oh yeah, that exists.
Right, to verify it exists for the staff.
So I am kind of wondering in terms of location, since maybe it could vary, what are we asking for a location? An address, a city, how specific are we wanting with that too?
Well, locations like, where is it, online?
Oh, right, that too, right. Is it online versus in person?
I mean, won't we be getting that from the description of the program itself? I mean, that's kind of,
Well, not location. We're talking elements and methods of providing services is different from where are you located.
The same modality, maybe?
So
that's too general.
Steve, may I ask a question?
Okay.
So how is staff currently vetting these programs?
Yeah.
They don't
have them, right?
Well, that's a good question, actually.
We don't. I never, in all this, I've never seen a situation where
because we've had organizations that are religious based, we've had the AA models, we've had indigenous people versions of programs, and they've all come before us, and they've all been perfectly welcomed and received and understood. And so I'm wondering what we're trying to codify here specifically that's not being covered by staff work already.
Well, it's not currently in our disciplinary guidelines, so it's all underlined because it's a new idea for allowing somebody to show rehabilitation by saying they did this as part of their recovery or rehabilitation. So the idea was to just give people more tools, or the board more tools, to suggest people take it, or as part of a settlement agreement, they would offer to take it. Psychology board has this in their current disciplinary guidelines, but it's not common among the healing arts boards because not everybody accepts it as a method of recovery or rehabilitation. What we brought to you is the idea that you would accept it as evidence of something they did to try to show that they're making meaningful progress in remediating the problem. So it's not unusual, but it's not common for boards to have it in the guidelines because not everyone feels from a policy perspective that it's helpful. If you don't think it's helpful, we can just take it out, and then you just would never order it as part of probation unless they agree to settle it, include it, or you agree to settle it as part of a case. But we're putting it forward to you as an idea that it be something you always consider doing in potentially all of your cases, or maybe have available to you to have in all cases, because it's much harder to draft language on the fly when you're at a petition for reinstatement, for instance. And then if it's in the guidelines, you can say, look, here's something we could put in this particular situation that would maybe be helpful. So the question is, do you want to keep this as an idea for the board to consider adding to its probationary orders? If so, what would you add?
I'm not suggesting removing it. I'm just trying to point out that there are some problems with the current language. That's actually what I'm pointing out.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying remove.
Okay, good.
But I am trying to find out from Steve's information, there are ways we're doing it now. What information are they gathering? and how do we use that in this new languaging that we're posing so it becomes a workable piece for staff, but also becomes a workable piece for the people who are under discipline. Because once again, back to my initial point, it is impossible for that contact information piece to be fulfilled.
It's almost like I wish we could put, provide the board with the necessary enough necessary information to determine that that program is actually existing. Language,
Yeah.
I know you don't want to, then that opens up.
Well, the Office of Administrative Law is very rigorous in their review, and one of the standards we have to meet is clarity. So if the text is open to more than one interpretation, they will say it fails the clarity standard and they will reject your regulation. They'll actually reject the whole package just for that issue. So that's why we tried to break it down based upon what Psychology Board has adopted in their guidelines. And again, this is not something that's currently in your program. We're suggesting putting it in here based upon maybe your case histories. I don't know, maybe it's come up before for you in the past. And again, Psychology Board has something like this, not exactly, but something like this in their guidelines. And we thought maybe we'd bring it to you to consider adding to your program, because right now it's not in your program.
And forgive me if my computer went down, so I don't have. So does it ask for the name of the program?
For prior approval, the name of one or more recovery support programs and information about the proposed program that includes the location, contact information, and the program's elements and methods for providing recovery support services.
I mean, why not just contact information if available? And then because that...
We go back to what we were saying before, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might not even be, it's not even applicable, and if they don't present that to us during the time, we're going to be looking for the name or the context of the recovery program, and then...
If it's not there, it's not there, and that's okay. And the staff will work otherwise to just verify it's a program and approve it. And it's just for internal staff work for the probation monitors.
Right, and if a probation monitor felt like they didn't have enough information, they could engage with the probationer to get...
And work through that.
So would we want to go with...
If available?
Contact information if available?
Yeah. No harm, no foul.
Right, if they don't provide...
Are you comfortable with that, John?
No? Well, I mean, it could come out all together.
Yeah, we could,
I would pull it completely, but that's just one person's thoughts on this.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm not sure we went to...
No, we did it, but I wasn't sure if you were finishing up.
No.
So the question would be, after you finish your presentation, if we could come back to this item and make a committee recommendation to add, if available, or strike the words contact information from this section, that would be, I think, helpful to resolve before we bring to the board, unless you feel like you'd like them to have the same discussion. But it seems like you're pretty comfortable with your ideas about this. I don't know that if you need...
Yeah, I speak for myself. To me, it was just in hundreds of cases I've seen this issue of confirming the recovery journey through a modality like that has never brought it to our attention to not be truthful, because it was always attached to other elements of recovery. It could be the story, the journey, the practice, the testing, and... Or
they're in a more formal program.
It was never come, oh, wow, they told us that they were doing this, and this never happened. It was never the element that will have, sometimes some of us ask, what is the stage of recovery? That maybe might give us a sense of, are they really working on the recovery if they're using the 12 steps, right? And sometimes we've been asking, what is your step right now, and what does it feel to you? But not because they had to, but because they brought it to our attention that was one of their journeys. So it was never a case. So that's why maybe introducing even a language around it kind of personally unsettles me a little bit, because it feels like, what is the need around it to ultra define the experience, when in reality the nature of the experience per se has been helpful to thousands of people, but not everyone, in the recovery journey because it was very casual, but at the same time, a commitment. So that's the only thing that I think strikes me as new in my personal opinion. But yeah, that will accommodate that.
Okay.
Okay, I want to make sure that I don't cut you off because
That's okay. I think we need to go to
the public, yes.
Yeah,
I want to.
and then I do have more.
Okay, let's do that. First of all, the audience in the room. Thank you, Ben.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. On the penalty guidelines number 9, replacing the phrase controlled substances with drugs or alcohol, I think is really problematic and is going to have some unintended consequences. Taking it literally as it is written right now, this language would prohibit someone who's on probation for a substance-related violation from taking an aspirin, being on birth control, eating chocolate, or drinking a Pepsi. And those are just examples of possessing or ingesting drugs for purposes that are not prescribed for a bona fide illness. I understand that you're trying to be clear on what you're capturing, but I think the current language winds up really broad in a problematic way. And I would suggest instead either going back to controlled substances or making clear that you're wanting to prohibit the possession or consumption of controlled substances or alcohol, but that as it relates to over-the-counter medication, caffeine, those kinds of drugs, that what you're really looking to prohibit is abuse and not possession or consumption. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what we're doing right now is looking at the uniform standards to see what language it uses, as well as...
Uniform standards prescribes abstention from all drugs and alcohol. And so Business and Professions Code Section 315, we have to apply the standards as written. And the Attorney General's office opinion has been that we have no authority to deviate from those standards. So I don't know if you recall what happened back when the uniform standards were going through, but most of the boards were wildly unhappy with the concept that they wouldn't have discretion to set the conditions for their probationers when it came to substance abuse. But we didn't win the argument, unfortunately, in the legislature, and the bill went through, and the Attorney General's office opinion was we have no authority to deviate from the standard uniform standards that are developed by the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee, which is a group composed of the executive officers of the department and a couple other agencies. So I wish I could say that it's your decision on uniform standards changes, but it isn't according to the Attorney General's office, even though we tried to make the argument otherwise. So if you want to make that change, it would have to be a legislative fix, unfortunately.
Am I correct in understanding that taken at face value, complete abstention from drugs and alcohol for any purpose aside from medication prescribed by a physician for a bona fide illness would therefore mean that a probationer over a substance use issue couldn't be on birth control, because that's not a bona fide illness, not wanting to get pregnant, couldn't have a medication-induced abortion, because that's also not bona fide illness if it's an elective abortion. This is really problematic.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with you. The problem is we're not allowed to change the language. We're supposed to apply the standards as written. That's what the Attorney General's office opinion says. But in practice, I'll tell you that we have a contract with Maximus, and they test for controlled substances in enforcement. That's my understanding, correct? Controlled substances. So, we tried to make it reasonable in implementation as best we can under what power we have, that we're limited by the opinion of the Attorney General's office really kind of sandwiched us in terms of what we can do with the uniform standards, and we can't amend them in a way that would substantively change what they wrote. So if you look up the uniform standards and read them, you'll see that we've mirrored those standards here. And so there's no opportunity to really change the text, but implementation, go ahead.
Actually, I'm looking at the uniform standards, and it does kind of go back and forth. It does use controlled substance in certain contexts. So
right,
like,
but when they're dealing
testing?
with the abstention term, it actually says from drugs and alcohol.
Okay, okay.
So I understand the concerns, but unfortunately, I think that because I know the Office of Administrative Law is aware of that opinion and they enforce it. In fact, they rejected the medical board's disciplinary guidelines that deviated from the uniform standards and cited the Attorney General's office opinion as their basis for doing it, that I don't think we'd have much legal standing to make that change to what you're talking about.
That's
until
really shocking.
It is shocking. I'm surprised that there hasn't been any challenges, but there haven't, as far as I know, to that statute. So we are bound by that statute, and you may want to have someone come to one of your board meetings and explain how we do the actual drug testing for the program. So maybe you'd be a little bit assuaged by that, the way that we're implementing it. But the law, we're kind of bound by that Attorney General's office opinion so far, anyway.
And the uniform standards do talk about positive tests for alcohol and controlled substance. So just to support what you're saying about what is
about how we implement it.
So that is there. But Mike, I have a question about whether this part about unless lawfully prescribed by a medical practitioner for a bona fide illness, could that be clarified somewhat? Do we have any authority over that piece?
Well, if that's, and I'd go back and I thought we checked this, the bona fide illness, what came out of the uniform standards. So we'd have to describe what a bona fide illness was, but to your point, it's not always an illness. It could be an injury.
And I think that goes to how we actually implement it, because they are only given parameters, what to test for. And you know, whatever else comes up, and that's how they start to engage with a probationer too, because once you get a positive on whatever's on the radar, for lack of a better word, then they engage with the person and say, oh, bona fide illness, they get the doctor note, and all is well in the world.
Right.
And that just starts that conversation, and they're only testing for and alerting on certain controlled substances.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Any other questions from members of the audience here? No? Moderator, can you please open to the public to see if there are any comments on this?
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click that question mark, type comment, send to all panelists. If you're calling in, *3 to raise your virtual hand. I'm Kathy Atkins, going to send a request to mute your microphone.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Kathy Atkins with CAMFT. I don't have a lot to offer right now in the weeds of the language, and I know this is going to the full board. I guess a question I would have, I'm wondering if it can be answered just to assist with how we would proceed between now and the board, is just if there's room, I'm less knowledgeable with regulations than I am legislation. I wonder if there's ever room or area for intent language or something along those lines, recognizing that you can't change the overarching statute that oversees the implementation regulations. So I was just curious, you know, where there's room to not totally you know, throw off the course of action on something, but maybe improve. Thank you for any feedback.
Thank you. Moderator?
No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're back to the board. Christy, there are any, I know you would like to proceed, right, with the other aspect of?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do have more, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, now we're on to the standard terms and conditions of probation. So under the obey all laws term, we're providing a fuller description of what it means for fingerprints to be currently on file with the board, because it's a little bit complicated depending on when somebody applied, if they have an active this or that. So we just are defining that. The quarterly reports. So we have made some numerous revisions to our quarterly report form to improve clarity, as well as making sure the form matches the terms and conditions of probation, as including all the what's proposed to be updated in our disciplinary guidelines, because the purpose of this form really is to help the probationer and the probation monitor to kind of go through this quarterly check to see, okay, did you comply with this? If you didn't, what happened? You know, just reporting on the progress that they've made. We've provided much better instructions that clarify requirements for how it's to be, this form is to be completed and submitted. And then we've kind of tweaked the language and things to help better assist staff in determining whether the respondent has complied with their terms and conditions of probation. And that's actually for the respondent as well. You know, just making the form make a little more sense, a little better flow, and looking at the questions that we're asking. So I didn't get into the specifics of what we've changed, but there are quite a few changes, you know, and it's in the attachment B. The failure to practice, or also known as tolling provision, tolling is a suspension of probation, which occurs when a respondent ceases to practice in California or to reside in California, per the proposed language, for more than 30 days. The latest amendment, because it's hard for them to comply with probation if they're not practicing certain pieces of probation. The latest amendments would strike the previously proposed to be added good cause allowance for ceasing to practice or reside in California for more than the 2-year time limit due to illness or disability. That has been stricken on the advice of legal counsel, and maybe Christy may want to go into this, but and the reason is that it felt that it would be contrary to public protection to allow tolling for more than 2 years, and that is under any circumstances, because tolling is sometimes, people use it as a loophole, just to be clear. It's a way for people to avoid compliance with their probation terms and conditions. The updated language also removes the automatic license cancellation for non-practice for more than 2 years, and now states that it would be a violation of probation instead of just automatically canceling a license. In this kind of a case, the board may revoke the license after an accusation or a petition to revoke probation. And then the respondent in that situation can make the case of why they should be able to keep their license, or they could petition for a reduction of penalty if they want to shorten or remove terms of probation. I'll just go through these last two because there's not much, and then, well, these aren't the last few, but I'm going to go through 3 more, and then we'll stop there. And then we just have one more short section. So the last few are a notification to employer, just to define what contract employment means, because we're trying to define who's an employer. The unlicensed surrender requires the respondent to include a written statement that explains why they seek to surrender their license. And then under cost recovery, it's just specifying some considerations for determining a payment plan. So I will stop there.
Would you like to, Chris, perhaps, would you like us to finish everything and then go into the conversation?
Yeah,
I think it would be better.
Yeah, I think let's go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Okay. I was just thinking there might be more discussion on those, but these other ones, it might be more straightforward. So going into board policies and guidelines, so a lot of this section is providing language for the deputy attorney generals when they're writing up an order. So it's a lot of recommended language. So the first piece is stipulated settlements. So these latest amendments address grounds for denial that pertain to a statement of issues that's for applicants, so denial of an application. So we just had to add in some language there to ensure applicants were included. Recommended language for license surrenders, we're just kind of streamlining that previously proposed recommended license surrender order language. We felt that could be streamlined quite a bit. Recommended language for revocation of license, that we added some language for that to give a template. Reinstatement and reduction of penalty hearings. It changed the previously proposed language for where the board is considering whether a petitioner has cooperated with the investigation and such, to instead consider where the petitioner has demonstrated a recognition of wrongdoing. In addition, the recommended order language for denial and reinstatement have been updated. So that's the end. So we can go from there.
Yeah, that's definitely better like this. So in going back to the board, if there are any other comments or clarifications about this latest part, before I open to the public, I would like to see, because also I'm looking at the time as well. So should we, one of the recommendations was definitely to go back to the board with the revised proposals, and is any particular motions that you would like that was indicated based also on the conversation we had so far?
Yeah, I'll let Christy provide us with the motion when it's time. So, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I'm not
asking
asking you to propose the motion, but just to have an idea so that I can go back to the public to understand actually if we can make a proposal already, a motion, or not.
Oh, yeah. I did want to revisit the recovery support program term, I would separate that out as a separate motion where you make a motion to remove that term from the proposal.
Okay.
Or modify it. I don't know which way you want to go.
Okay.
So it could be like contact information if available, or just take out contact information, whichever way. And then you'd vote on that. Well, you'd take public comment, then vote on that motion. Then we'd come back, if you're okay with moving the rest forward with the amended text, then we would make a motion to move the proposal with the amended text. So two motions.
Thank you. So at this point,
unless you have other changes.
Thank you. Since the first part of this conversation was already addressed with some of the concerns, so I would like to see if there is a motion about the first part in regards to the possible removal or not of the language around the substance abuse support, the support groups, or recovery groups, excuse me. And then we can open to the public to see if there are any comments on the motion. Are there any motions on the floor that will propose or to remove the language around it or to specify the language in regards to the conversation that we have?
I'd like to make a motion. You'll have to reform it to remove the requirement of contact information from the substance use recovery section of the bill.
I'll second that. Any conversation, discussions on the board? Okay, I'll go to the public with a motion. Any comments from audience on the floor? None. Moderator, can you please open to the public specific about the motion on the floor that was just made?
The Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. Click on that question mark, type comments, send to all panelists, or *3 to raise your hand virtually from your phone. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. So again, we have a motion on the floor, moved from John Savick, second by myself. If there are any comments or clarifications, we can go to vote. Christine, can you please call the vote?
Max Disposti?
Yes.
John Savick?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you for the guidance on the procedures as well, Christine. Thank you so much. And now we can proceed. We were in the second part of the conversation. I would like to see if there is any motion of indications in regards to going back to the board. Definitely, that's something we agreed to with the proposed changes. But I don't believe there were any concern. I know that Ben brought the concern around the language around substance abuse, or what defines drugs. You strike me when you talk about chocolate. I felt really directly. I said, oh my gosh, don't touch the chocolate. But I believe that also the clarification was very helpful in regards to standards of language, that we don't, seems like we don't have any much leverage around it unless we are challenging the whole.
I mean, I will re-examine again to make sure there isn't any area we could maybe clarify.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be inconsistent with the way they wrote it in the uniform standards, so I'll take a second look just to be
I appreciate
more
that. Thank you.
comfortable with what we're setting forth.
And also, since we're also voting to bring the conversation to the board, I'm confident the staff will be able to also report if there are any news in regards to that, and also convey this concern around the language around, what defines.
Correct.
So the motion will be, I would like to move the motion to.
But the last portion of what we talked about, I don't think we discussed yet, though. We didn't take comment yet.
Right. No, I can always make a motion and then we can open to the comments anyway.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha.
But I can make a motion to approve the proposed changes without, without any substantial changes to go to.
Motion to approve the text with the amendments. Sorry. You can make a motion to approve the text with the amendments discussed at this meeting and acted on at this meeting, and authorize staff to make non-substantive changes to the proposed language and recommend bringing the proposal to the board for consideration as a regulation proposal at the next meeting.
Exactly. Thank you. I know I'm so good on these motions, and I was trying to look on I always missed it. It was at page 8, I guess, but then I couldn't find it anymore. I've made a motion. Is there any second for that motion? And then we can go to the public and discussion. Any second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, now we have a motion on the floor. I would like to go on our audience here in Sacramento. No comments. Moderator, can you please open to the public?
The Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on that question mark, type comment, send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions on the motions or considerations of comments from the board? Okay, we have a motion on the floor, so I would like Christine to call the vote. Thank you.
Max Desposi?
Yes.
John Sobek?
Yes. Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Abigail Ortega?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That will conclude, right? I want to make sure I'm not losing it today. We're moving, we just concluded agenda 8, item 8 on our agenda. We're moving to item 9, which is the update on board sponsors and board monitor legislations. And now I know it's Roseanne. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're a little over halfway through the legislative cycle for the year. The legislature actually just last week went on its summer recess, so it'll be coming back on August 14th to kind of finish up a lot of the bills. They're all past their second policy committee, or they've died or become 2-year bills. So we'll be getting some answers in August on whether several bills are going to be moving forward to the governor's desk. But a few updates. Our bill, AB 232, which is a temporary practice allowance proposal, is moving along nicely. It's in the Senate Appropriations Committee now, which is the last committee that it has to go through. And then our omnibus bill is also in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. A couple of other bills that the board had support positions on that have been amended significantly. We'll be taking a look at the August board meeting, include SB 11, which is about mental health counseling in the state university system and creating a mental health pipeline. And then also the board and DCA and the author's office for SB 372, which is the license and registrant record name and gender changes, have done some extensive work on getting that bill to really accomplish its purpose. And so there's a brand new version of that that's changed pretty significantly. So we'll be taking that back to the board in August so that the board can update its position if it would like to. And then SB 373 hasn't been amended since the board considered it. That's the licensee and registrant's address. The board still has a valid support position on that bill because it hasn't really been amended significantly. So yeah, and then another bill that the board was monitoring, SB 766, which is the title protection for social workers. That is a 2-year bill at this point. So are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Should we just move forward and then open to the public? There are any comments or for any bill we go out?
Do we usually take public? I don't think it's just an information.
No, just if there are, yeah. I know it's not a vote, but I just think there are any comments. Okay. Go ahead, Roseanne. We can go. Yeah.
That's it. That's all. That's all
okay.
I've got.
That was way faster. Okay, so are there any comments, questions about any of the bills that Roseanne went over? At this point, I'll go to the public. Are there any comments on members of the public that are here? Moderator, if you can please check if there are any questions and comments on the updates.
Q&A open, question mark, type comments, send it to all panelists, or press *3 for calling in to raise your hand. Instructions are on the screen. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we are moving to item 10, right? We're moving to item 10 and updates on the board rulemaking proposal.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to report because the board hasn't, well, you've seen what we have, pending here, but we don't have any currently moving through the process. So really, other than what we talked about here today, and then we also do have that licensed educational psychologist experience proposal we were going to bring today, but it'll be coming to the next meeting after we work a few more things out. So
wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. And now at this point, we're moving agenda item 11, which is suggestions for future agenda items. Fellow board members, if there are any comments or suggestions for future agenda items, this is the time. I don't see anyone. And anyone from the public? Thank you.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I just have 2 suggestions. The first is a question about required supervision for those who are graduated from their graduate program, so they're no longer trainees. We're talking about MFTs here, but also who are not yet associates or even applicants. They may be gaining what will be experience under the 90-day rule because they're going to apply for registration within 90 days of their degree posting date, but they haven't yet actually even applied for registration. They're in this sort of weird in between, and questions sometimes come up about how much supervision those folks actually need. I think there's a common-ish understanding that they need the same amount of supervision as associates do. But there are those supervisors who wonder whether they are obligated to continue to provide the same level of supervision that they were providing to a trainee. So simply clarification on the supervision necessary for that group of MFTs and applicants would be helpful. And then the second, I don't know whether this is actually something that needs formal policy in the sense of like regulation. But one of the most common questions that I see, and I would suspect it's true for the associations as well, is what forms of signatures the board is continuing to accept. And it would be helpful if the board had something official, even if just a statement of practice on its website in that regard. Do you accept wet signatures, of course, but digital signatures? Do you accept like DocuSign? Is it enough if somebody types their name on a form? Does that count as a signature? The more clarity you could provide there, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for that. And I would like to open to the public, moderator, to see if there are any suggestions for future agenda items.
Now open, instructions are on the screen. Click on the question mark, type comment, send it to all panelists, or click on the outline of a hand to raise your hand. That's located bottom center of your WebEx screen or next to your name in the panelist list. I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Okay, back to the board now. Item 12, which is public comments for the agenda, not in the for items not in the agenda. This is the time where we can address any issues. As you know, the board will not, the P&A committee in this case will not be able to address the merit of these comments, but you're free to share anything that you think is important, relevant to the work of this committee. So looking at my fellow board members, I don't believe I see any hands or any comments. Members of the public, we're good. Moderator, for the last time, if we can open and see if there are any public comments for items not in the agenda.
Q&A is open, instructions on the screen. Click on that question mark, type comments, send it to all panelists, click the outline of a hand, bottom center of your WebEx screen, or next to your name in the panelist list. I see no requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you so much. And with that, we'll conclude the board, the P&A committee today. Sorry for the confusion. I haven't seen in too many boards. And we are actually adjourned on Friday, July 21st at 3:22 p.m. Thank you so much.